Chapter 61. That evening, Cassian was summoned. Dumbledore hadn't written a time. Just a note, charmed to hover ominously above his teacup. Headmaster's office. This evening. No signature. No smiley face. He sighed. What happened this time? He found them already waiting by the time he arrived, Dumbledore behind the desk, McGonagall in her usual place by the hearth, and Snape standing like someone had tried to rearrange his spine with a stick. No tea in sight. Bad sign, Professor Cassian, Dumbledore said, smiling as always. Thank you for coming. Summoned by 3 professors and no biscuits? You wound me. Snape's lip twitched, almost a snarl. You performed a voice-snaring charm on a student, Snape said. Ah, Cassian tilted his head. So that is what this is about. Dumbledore folded his hands on the desk. It was brought to our attention that Mr. Malfoy couldn't speak, Snape snapped. Nor could several of his classmates during one of your classes in front of both houses. Do you consider that appropriate classroom conduct? Cassian dropped into the chair. I find screaming less educational than silence, especially when the screaming is about bloodlines and personal relationships. McGonagall's eyebrow rose. Snape stepped forward. You are not a disciplinary figure. I wasn't punishing them. I was giving them a chance to shut up and think. Cassian glanced at Dumbledore. And for the record, the spell was temporary. They were perfectly unharmed. In fact, I would say they were in better shape than usual. No hex marks. No singed eyebrows. Malfoy got through a whole class without insulting someone. Well, after his first one, of course. Snape's eyes narrowed. Dumbledore raised a hand. I am less concerned about the spell itself than I am about the context. His eyes slid sideways to McGonagall. Minerva, she adjusted her collar. Several parents have written, she said, voice serious as funeral, that your first-year class included demonstrations that, while unorthodox, appear to contradict basic wizarding educational standards. Cassian's eyebrows made the sort of slow ascent usually reserved for hot air balloons. You mean the pen, that, and your advocacy of Muggle methodology, she said. Your tone was also flagged. He blinked. Tone? Snape snorted sharply through his nose. You encouraged students to reject foundational magical authority. You spoke against Hogwarts' own historical canon, and apparently claimed that Salazar Slytherin once hexed a badger. I said he tried, Cassian corrected. The badger outwit him. Forbidden section. Shelf 7B, row 4, volume the 3rd, Bestiary of Elusive Beasts. Dumbledore didn't smile. That alone told him this wasn't one of those quiet chats about maybe tone it down a notch. No chuckle, no vague. We all remember our first term anecdote. McGonagall looked over her glasses. You were hired to teach magical history, not rewrite it with a Muggle pen and call it innovation, Cassian shrugged. You didn't hire me to recite textbooks. I'm not teaching falsehoods. That depends on your definition of wrong, Snape cut in. Telling first years that Hogwarts, a history is bollocks with footnotes, hardly qualifies as academic rigor. Cassian leaned back in the chair. I said parts of it were edited by people with a nostalgia problem. It is not my fault if students assume everything in hardback is gospel. McGonagall's lips thinned. That is not the main issue, Professor Rosier. Quills are a crucial part of magical education, and the tool, it is a pen, he said, as if that explained everything. Ink goes in, words come out. Nobody bursts into flames. It is a statement, she said. You use it to provoke. Of course I provoke, Cassian said. It is called teaching. If they are not rattled, they are not learning. Daily quill work is not nostalgia, Professor. It trains pressure, angle, and stroke discipline. Those habits become rune strokes, ward circles, and the grammar of magical scripts. Pens do not teach a hand to carry magic, she huffed. At owl and newt level, a single heavy serif on Sylvie can turn a bind into a burst. Examiners can read a student's control in the taper of a stroke. We cultivate that control early. A quill makes you show it. Cassian opened his mouth for another jab, but McGonagall cut him off, voice sharper now. In the field there is no biro. There is chalk, ash, bone, sometimes blood. A hand trained on quill does not tremble when a ward demands a hair's breadth. That is why we use them daily. Cassian raised both hands, palms out, voice softer. Fair point. And I wasn't saying they should all throw their quills away and flood Flourish and Blots with pen orders. I was asking why. Why they write with something harder, messier, slower, if they don't know the reason. It was an exercise, not a manifesto. A way to make them stop doing things because they are told to and start asking what purpose it serves. Break the mold a little, that was all. Dumbledore hadn't spoken in a while. Not unusual. He was watching. That particular kind of quiet that didn't feel passive, like he was folding Cassian into a riddle. You think it appropriate, McGonagall pressed, to undermine magical norms to this degree? No, Cassian said. I think it is necessary. Snape scoffed. Necessary to lecture children on the failures of magical society? To claim that Muggles are more advanced in certain areas? What exactly is the goal of your class? Cassian glared at Snape. If I remember right, Severus, you were a half-blood, weren't you? You should know exactly where Muggles outpace us. Snape's shoulders stiffened. Are you insulting me? Cassian blinked, then tilted his head like he'd just been asked if water was dry. What the hell are you talking about? Since when is having a Muggle parent an insult? Snape's glare sharpened. Even McGonagall froze, mouth half open. Cassian gestured vaguely toward the office walls. Look, if your entire sense of worth relies on which half of your blood can do laundry easier, then I really don't know what to tell you. Dumbledore's fingers drummed once against his desk. Enough? Cassian didn't flinch. He sat back, still watching Snape. You asked the goal of my class, Cassian said, finally dragging his eyes back to Dumbledore. It is to teach history. All of it. Not just the bits the Ministry stamped and bound into overpriced textbooks. Not just the pompous monologues written by people trying to scrape their name into a tapestry. Snape's voice cut in, sharper than before. That doesn't explain the ideology you insist upon. Cassian glanced down at his coat pocket. It is a damn pen. It is a symbol. Snape shot back. Well spotted, he said. So are wands. So are house colors. So is every statue in this castle. I am just the first one who decided maybe, just maybe, our tools could be practical instead of performative. Snape moved to the edge of the desk. You encourage disrespect, undermining magical authority. You speak like someone who holds no reverence for our traditions. Cassian raised a brow. No, I hold no reverence for bad traditions. Snape's lip curled. I am not recruiting. I am educating, Cassian went on. But if you want them to understand magic, really understand it, they need to see where it fits in the wider world. Not just in this bubble of enchanted corridors and Latin phrases. You mean the Muggle world, Snape said with a laugh. I mean reality. Cassian leaned forward. Your students aren't going to live in a bubble forever. You want them to know how to handle a cursed goblet. Great. But what happens when they are 30 and can't read a bank form because no one taught them how to operate a pen? McGonagall's eyes narrowed. You are a history professor, not a Muggle studies liaison. Cassian tapped the armrest. History is not made in isolation. Every war, every movement, every spell, written into the annals of great wizarding achievements. All of it exists in the same world as Muggle revolutions, plagues, literature, and tea kettles. Are you suggesting we let Muggle culture into our curriculum? Snape asked, scorn curling behind every word. I am suggesting, Cassian said, that it is already here. You are just pretending not to see it. Snape smirked. You are a fool. You have no idea what you are talking about. Cassian chuckled. Really? You think Muggle science has nothing to do with our magic? Send an owl to Nicholas Flamel. Ask if alchemy is somehow not chemistry wearing a fancier robe. Go ask Madame Hooch if she doesn't factor in gravity every time she tosses a quaffle. Or better yet, Severus, ask yourself, when you boil water for your potions, don't you measure it? Or do you still go by a splash and 3 pinches and a prayer? Snape's mouth opened, but Cassian wasn't finished. Oh, I forgot. He went on, pacing now, hands in his coat pockets. You are so bleeding traditional. You probably still measure by cups instead of units. Next, you will be telling me the moon is made of spell dust and unicorn farts. McGonagall crossed her arms. No one is saying muggles don't offer insight. Actually, Cassian said, jerking a thumb at Snape, he very nearly did. Snape sneered. Muggles cannot perform magic. No, they can't, Cassian said. But they can build flying machines that cross oceans. They can split atoms. Severus. Do you even know what that means? Dumbledore's gaze drifted from Cassian to the fireplace, unreadable as ever. Cassian moved again. Meanwhile, half our magical defenses are make it hiss and glow ominously. No backup plans. No understanding of what makes the magic work, just incantations barked out like recipes in a dying language. You speak of recklessness, Snape snapped. You parade half-truths before children. I teach them to question things, Cassian said. Big difference. Dumbledore finally decided to join the conversation. And yet, many of your students are now citing Muggle advancements as superior to wizarding traditions. That is not on me, Cassian said, turning. That is on the people who keep telling them wizard kind is flawless, and ancient and eternally wise. They come into class thinking witches popped out of the earth fully formed, robes already pressed. All I do is show them the cracks. McGonagall's voice was flat. What cracks? Oh, you know, Cassian said, raising fingers. Blood supremacy, war crimes, keeping elves in pillowcases, the casual child endangerment system we call education. The fact that the most brilliant minds of our world decided an exploding spell was less dangerous than a comprehensive sex ed class. Snape let out a growl. You mock everything. No, Severus, Cassian said. I mock stupid things, but I can see why you are confused. Dumbledore tapped his desk again. We are not here to debate the ethics of magical education. Cassian raised an eyebrow. Aren't we? McGonagall pinched the bridge of her nose. Cassian, your methods are too unconventional. That is the point, he said. Convention gave us Grindelwald. Convention gave us a society that won't let a Muggle-born sit on the Wizengamot. Convention put students in a house system based on personality traits, and then acted shocked when they started stabbing each other over dinner. Snape's eyes darkened. And your solution is what? Exactly. Throw out everything and let them play with Muggle toys. No, Cassian said, stepping forward again. My solution is to make them think. Not parrot, not kneel. Think. Let them see the full picture. The good, the bad, the bits covered in ministry stamps, and the parts they shoved in the attic. Dumbledore sighed, leaning back, meaning the verdict was given. You are aware that several parents have written in. Cassian didn't flinch. Of course they have. One mentioned, Dumbledore continued, that your lectures may encourage a radical deconstruction of magical heritage. Cassian shrugged. Good, someone ought to. He reached into his coat and pulled out 2 pens, plain, cheap, plastic ones. Placed them gently across the desk. One landed neatly in front of McGonagall. The other hit a paperweight and spun to a halt near Dumbledore's teacup. Do you know what these are? I mean, really know? Not just a Muggle writing thing, how they were built, how they were designed. He exhaled some of the heat from his chest. Despite looking like a joke next to a wand, those things are tiny marvels of engineering. You ever try making something that's small not leak, clog, or explode under pressure? It is a miracle, honestly. McGonagall didn't touch the pen. Dumbledore gave it a cursory glance, then folded his hands again. They are designed for mass production, Cassian went on. No magic, no core. Just ink, pressure, gravity, and clever problem solving. Do you have any idea how many people had to screw up for those to exist? Snape muttered. This is hardly relevant. Cassian didn't even blink. It is the most relevant thing in the room. He nodded at the pens. You want to talk about heritage? There is a story behind those. Every part of them. They can write upside down, slanted, in water, in bloody space. Cassian laughed. A quill will slit your fingers open if you so much as breathe wrong. I taught them that. Told them straight. If the thing you are scribbling doesn't need magical conductivity, A quill is the worst option. Worse than a bloody stick and hope. I showed them the difference. That is it. How is that wrong? Dumbledore raised a hand before the other two could say anything. Professor Rosier, we ask you to be mindful. You are employed here not just to teach, but to represent Hogwarts. What you say in that classroom shapes how our students understand the world. And God's forbid they understand it correctly, Cassian said. Wouldn't want them wandering around thinking for themselves. McGonagall took off her glasses, cleaned them, a move that usually meant she was fighting the urge to hex someone and didn't want smudges in her line of sight. You are here as part of a faculty, not a revolution. I noticed. It is very unified, Cassian said, waving a hand. So far today, I've been accused of radicalizing children with office supplies and questioning the orthodoxy of a badger fight. Snape stiffened. You are not taking this seriously. I am taking the students seriously, which, judging by this meeting, might be the actual problem. Dumbledore's voice came quieter this time. That may be precisely it, Cassian. You care. I do not question that. But you have a tendency to treat your classroom like a stage. Cassian blinked, then gave the kind of grin that looked more like a warning label. You want me to be boring. I want you to be careful. Dumbledore sat back. We are not asking for silence, but perhaps a touch of restraint. You may challenge, but don't mock. He tucked the chair back. I will rein it in. No pens near the altar. I will try not to provoke any sacred cows unless they move first. Snape muttered something under his breath. As he turned for the door, Dumbledore's voice caught him again. Professor Rosier, he paused. We hired you for a reason. Cassian didn't look back. Yeah, one of these days. I'd like to know what it was. Then he left. Chapter 62. Walking out the headmaster's office, Cassian clenched his fist. He had no illusions. This wasn't about pens, or tone, or even that bloody badger comment. He taught the same class last year. Same jabs, same tricks, same teacup stunt. Dumbledore knew it too. Probably read half the assignments over his nightcap and chuckled into his beard. So this was about the audience. New faces, sharper ears, bigger names. Not all the first years came in equal. Malfoy's name might as well have been carved on half the bricks, and Cassian didn't need a seating chart to know which students had owls that carried family crests. The complaints hadn't come because he said something wrong. They came because he said it to the wrong people's children. Dumbledore hadn't stopped him, hadn't even frowned. He knew exactly what this was, a show for Lucius, not a trial for Cassian. And the reason he pushed back as hard as he did was simple. This wasn't a fight with Dumbledore or McGonagall. They were just the messengers. He knew it. They knew it. His jabs weren't aimed at them, and they weren't the ones who'd lose sleep over his tone. It was theater. Every line performed for the sake of whatever name sat behind the complaints. Everyone played their part well, except Snape, of course. Snape wasn't acting. Snape was just an arse. He made his way to Bathsheda's room, candles lit, a half-drunk mug of something steaming on the desk. Cassian spotted her behind a stack of scrolls and immediately threw himself across her lap with all the grace of a flung cloak. Mummy, he whined, muffling his face in her robes. They made me sad. She slapped his arm without looking up. Stop that. Mean, he muttered into the fabric. You are heavy. I am emotionally fragile. You are a grown man. I am traumatized. That meeting violates international treaties. She sighed, shoved her scrolls aside, and poked his ribs until he sat upright. What happened? He flopped back into her armchair, legs kicked out. They staged an intervention. I got told off for revolutionary pen use. After hearing the whole story, she blinked. You serious? Cassian held up a biro from his pocket, like it was Exhibit A. Apparently, this is too modern for the magical world. God forbid the children write legibly. And I might have accused Salazar Slytherin of starting a slap fight with a badger. Her brow twitched. You didn't, allegedly, and lost. Cass. It was relevant to the discussion. They were reciting textbook nonsense like gospel. Someone had to say it. She leaned back, arms folded. What did Dumbledore say? Didn't hex me, but he is worried I am a stage performer radicalizing the youth. That is not unfair. He threw a cushion at her head. She caught it, unimpressed. They had the nerve to say I am undermining magical authority. Cassian went on, sitting up to grab a biscuit from her plate. Like that is hard. The system is so fragile a strong breeze could undermine it. You did steal the Malfoy heir's voice. Borrowed. Gently. Returned with minimal scarring. And told students Hogwarts a history was full of lies. I said edited. You were such a pain. Cassian bit the biscuit in half. That is what they said. She nudged his boot with hers. So what? You come running to me for sympathy? I came for tea, but I will take pity if it is going. She pushed herself up and crossed the room to fetch another mug. You could make this easier on yourself. Don't push so hard. Don't dig your heels in every time someone raises an eyebrow. He slumped back again, stared at the ceiling. That is the problem, isn't it? I like it. The teaching, the mess, the questions. I actually care. And now I got bloody Draco's dad writing letters because I gave a kid a biro. She handed him the tea. What you gonna do? He scratched at the line of stubble under his jaw. I will deal with Daddy Lucius directly. If they think I am Professor Binns, they are sorely mistaken, he smirked. I am not a ghost. Bathsheba squinted at him. Here we go again. He kissed her, quick, soft, and a bite too to annoy her. Catch you later. You don't have to win every skirmish to win the war, they say, right? And with that, he swept out of her office like a man on a mission, which was bold, considering his mission involved exactly what any self-respecting pureblood did when things went sideways. Cry to his own daddy. Once inside, he locked the door, dragged a chair to the fireplace. He pulled out a blank sheet, clipped his biro, and stared at the paper. Dear Father, I write to assure you that my mission remains unchanged. The work you and Grandfather outlined continues. As promised, the students have responded well, some more than expected. Your concerns about influence and precedent are noted and accounted for. You asked for a method that would teach them to distinguish between the magical world and the non-magical one. A contrast. Sharp lines, obvious truths, cold logic. That is precisely what I am delivering. Nothing cements superiority better than comparison. The plan remains simple. Show them how Muggle solutions look clever. Highlight the mechanisms. Let them marvel. Then show where it all breaks. Where magic outstrips machine. Where centuries of wizarding tradition still hold the upper hand. Let them taste that thrill. Then show them the limitations. It is how you train a palate. Offer sweetness, then salt. I incorporated these demonstrations, subtly, pens, non-magical theories, historical reinterpretation, not as replacements, mind, but as examples, small interjections, enough to spark interest. Enough to set the boundaries. The clever ones try to bridge the gap, the others recoil. Either outcome is useful. You wanted them primed to understand what they are not? I am doing exactly that. They think I am provoking. They don't realize I am preparing. The younger students are particularly pliable. That is to be expected. They've not yet settled into ideological grooves. They parrot what they hear, chase whatever earns points. I've been careful to present magical authority not as oppressive, but established, stable, safe, in contrast to the Muggle world's unpredictability, its noise, its bluntness. That is the word I used, in fact. Blunt. No finesse. No wandcraft. Just wires and buttons and accidents that occasionally result in progress. The first years soaked it up. Potter, especially. Eager to understand, desperate not to fall behind. He parrots less than the others. Observes more. Dangerous, that, but manageable. He is at the stage where approval still matters. If I offer it sparingly, he will lean the right way. But that Malfoy is as arrogant as expected. He believes himself clever, but leans heavily on his surname to fill the gaps. I let him flounder once, took his voice. It made a point. He will recover. Slytherins always do. But the memory will stick. But Father, how am I supposed to carry out your vision? Your and grandfather's vision. If I am being throttled by the same purebloods who wouldn't know a real legacy if it hexed them in the arse. Lucius. Lucius Malfoy, with his little parade of peacocks and pocketed ministry favors. He wasn't made, he was placed, dropped into power like a stone into a pond, and now he wants to pretend the ripples were his own doing. This ridiculous summoning, the tone policing, the implied threat of a committee isn't about the pen, or the lesson, or even the snatched voice. It is an insult, meant to sting, meant to remind me where I stand. I was raised for this, sent for this, but they look at me and see an upstart in a borrowed coat, stirring trouble instead of saluting portraits. They forget your name, our name, built half the bones in this castle, so I ask plainly, handle them. Outside these walls, where I cannot, I can fight for the classroom. I can weather their pointed whispers and snide letters, and whatever next pathetic little tantrum they send my way. But I cannot wage war with Lucius Malfoy while teaching 11-year-olds how not to blow their fingers off with basic casting. He plays the political game like it is a family heirloom. I will not. Not here. I don't have time to smile for his allies or tiptoe around his spawn. What I need, what I demand is space, and you owe me that. See, Cassian grinned. Let's see whose daddy is stronger, Draco. He slid the finished letter into a thin parchment sheath and sealed it, then called, Tweak. A loud pop cracked the air. Tweak appeared on the rug with a startled blink. You called for Tweak, Master Professor Rosier? Cassian nodded, stretching his legs out in front of the fire. I need to send a letter. My elf will come pick it up. Be a dear and warn the others, will you? I would rather not start a turf war. Tweak gave a quick nod. Right away, Master Professor, and vanished with another pop. Cassian clicked his pen, rolled his eyes, and muttered, Towel! Another crack. A second elf appeared. You summoned Towel, Master Cassian, it squeaked, already reaching for something invisible. Cassian waved him down. Relax, it is not about cleaning. I need you to relay this straight to the Rosier estate. Personal delivery to father. No detours, no eavesdropping, no swapping letters with curious paintings. Yeah? Towel straightened. Yes, Master Cassian. Straight to the ancestral door. No talking, no sniffing the walls. Towel is invisible and dignified. Good. Go. Towel vanished. Asterisk, Cassian kept teaching. A little shiny around the edges. Sure. No biro endorsements. No snatching voices mid-sentence. No telling first years the founders were glorified roommates who nearly killed each other over dorm decor. But he didn't exactly go soft. He still used pens, claimed he retired the last one for reasons of national security. He left out the sharper jabs. But the class still got history, raw and twitching, not the sanitized museum version. Somewhere between Draco's father's letter and Snape's passive-aggressive scowling, Cassian figured it was time to stop painting targets on his back with neon paint, at least for now. Though Regulus's chat with Lucius, well, that was something Cassian would have paid galleons to watch. The Rosier Patriarch didn't write ahead, just showed up. He stepped straight through the ministry's front-facing politeness and walked into Malfoy Manor like he owned the damn place. Technically, he did twice removed, on his mother's side. Cassian didn't get the details, but he could imagine. He liked imagining. Lucius' face when the tall, unbothered shadow of Regulus Rosier crossed his velvet threshold. Hands behind his back, voice flat as parchment. Cassian smiled every time it crossed his mind. He could practically hear Lucius choking on his own welcome. Whatever was said, it worked. The letters stopped. No more concerns. No more notes about tone or content not aligned with curriculum. Cassian walked into class the next morning and wrote the word authority on the board in 6 languages. Then underlined it twice. No one said a word. Chapter 63. Lucius Malfoy liked his mornings neat. Curtains parted by elves at the exact angle to let in the winter sun. Silver polished until he could see his own disapproval staring back. Tea brewed at that precise temperature where it wouldn't burn his tongue, but might blister someone less refined. Order, ritual, control. So of course Regulus Rosier chose that exact hour to arrive. not bothering to send an owl or summons, not even a polite parchment with wax and crest. Regulus walked casually, didn't announce himself, didn't even pretend to hesitate as he passed through halls lined with velvet drapes and ancestral portraits that sneered at intruders. He was not an intruder. On his mother's side, the deed had been signed with ink and blood, twice removed, and Malfoys knew better than to forget debts. Lucius came down the staircase, stiff. Lord Rosier, he greeted with a grate in his voice. Regulus stood at the foot of the stairs, hands folded neatly behind his back, tall and composed. His eyes flicked across the chandelier, the tapestries, the faint scuff on the marble where an elf had been careless. Then back to Lucius with a sneer. "I heard you picked up a new hobby," Regulus said, staring. Lucius tilted his head slightly, one hand resting over the silver snake of his cane. "You will have to be more specific." "Letters," Regulus said, stepping further into the room. Charmed, duplicated, hand-delivered to the board and back again. Clever. Even paid off Goyle and Crabbe, I hear, the old one to concern and consensus. He looked around the entrance hall like admiring a painting he intended to sell. "You've always been fond of orchestration." Lucius didn't deny it. He casually smoothed his sleeve. "If someone's curriculum is disruptive, I would consider it a civic duty to raise the alarm. Surely you agree?" "I agree," Regulus said, "that you are far too old to be surprised by your own reflection." Lucius exhaled slowly through his nose. "If this is about Cassian, it is. Sharp and direct." Regulus didn't like holding his punches. He was too busy for hesitation. Lucius knew that, had known since they were boys, standing on opposite ends of drawing rooms, taught by fathers who'd both believed in cultivating intellect over sentiment. So he didn't flinch. He only raised a pale brow. "Cassian, then? What a shame. I had thought we might discuss something of value." Regulus did not take the bait. He waited. Regulus Rosier's silence was rarely empty. It was the pause in chess when a hand hovers over a pawn. "A bait. Would you like tea?" Lucius asked eventually, gesturing toward the parlor with all the bored charm of a man offering hospitality because it was tradition, not because he cared whether it was accepted. Regulus didn't answer, just stared. "You've been misinformed," Lucius said, brushing a speck of lint from his cuff. "No letters of mine ever mentioned Cassian. Explicitly, that is not what I asked." Lucius's mouth curved faintly. "It is not what I answered." Regulus looked down his nose at him. "You've made," Regulus said at last, "a grave mistake." Lucius turned away slightly. "I've made plenty. This one concerns my son." Yes, the prodigal historian. A brief smile. Charmed the children, insulted the staff, and used a muggle pen in open daylight. Remarkable. Truly, I do enjoy a good academic scandal. "You forget yourself." "I remember perfectly. It is your son I forget." Lucius's voice sharpened. "Up until recently, I couldn't even recall the boy could hold a wand upright." "Then again," Lucius went on, "I am told he has been quite popular with the children. Dumbledore's reports are glowing. Master G's comment reached even me. A curiosity, that." He sneered faintly. "You've worked rather hard to lend his tenure an air of legitimacy. G's endorsement. The French press. Your father's hand. No doubt, he always did have a flair for rehabilitating lost causes." He stepped away from the staircase. Almost makes one wonder if the boy's skill is in history or performance. Regulus didn't blink. He was sent to die on that expedition, wasn't he? Lucius mused tone-light. How convenient that he came back fluent in glyph work and cloaked in praise. Quite the resurrection arc. How very curated, Lucius went on. "But I don't blame you. I blame the desperation. The boy had nothing. No reputation. No record. Couldn't even cast a spell without weeping. And now here he is, a professor. A darling of half the staff, playing games with the curriculum while quoting war crimes over breakfast. I fail to see your point." Lucius turned his head slightly. "My point is, the illusion was working, quietly, cleverly, and I would have let it stand if not for the dramatics." Regulus stared dry, almost bored. You've never understood the difference between illusion and leverage. Lucius smiled without teeth. No, I've merely understood how often one becomes the other. He crossed the threshold into the sitting room, not looking to see if Regulus followed. He poured only one glass. 2 would imply negotiation. You've overplayed your hand, Lucius said, sipping slowly. Dumbledore may tolerate insolence, but the board does not, nor do parents. You saw the numbers. My letter addressed the heart of the problem. Regulus stepped forward. There will be no next one. Lucius's mouth twitched. So that is why you came. A paternal impulse. He laughed softly. And here I thought you'd given up on illusions. Regulus rested a hand on the antique chair. You misunderstand. I did not come to ask. Lucius raised a brow. I came to inform. The chair creaked under his fingers. Lucius looked down at it. You will not mention my son again, not to the board, not to your friends, not in the presence of ministry mouthpieces. You will not send letters. You will not commission whispers. You will not attempt to bend policy through wine and name games. And if I do? Regulus smiled, almost wolfish. Then I remind the ministry who sealed the Flinchcombe vote, who buried the Oakes testimony, who signed the protection writ for Adric Mulciber and filed it under civic reform. Oh, and who wrote the imperious lie. Lucius clenched the glass, almost breaking it. Old things, Regulus said softly, but not forgotten, and very easy to misplace once they're remembered. Lucius set his glass down. You would dig up your own house's past over him. Regulus studied him like a faded ledger. Rogiers know when to offer blood, he said. And which vein is worth opening? Lucius leaned back slowly, spine straight. You'd risk it all for a boy who couldn't conjure a candle 5 years ago? I'd risk nothing, Regulus said. Because I already did. He lived. Chapter 64. Things carried on. Cassian did dial it back. Not much, but still. Just changed the rhythm. Fewer fireworks, more rope. The Gryffindors were catching on quick. Hermione started arguing footnotes with him by next week. Neville still looked like he might spontaneously combust if called on. But he stopped flinching every time someone called his name. Seamus had set a quill on fire twice. Cassian refused to be impressed until it was intentional. And so arrived Cassian's favorite time of the year. Bathsheba and he stood at the edge of the grass like a pair of underwhelmed judges at a sheepdog trial. She smoothed the picnic blanket down with one knee while he rummaged in a box, weighing snacks for an afternoon of mild chaos. Bribed the elves, he said, setting out a slab of treacle tart with the same reverence some people reserved for holy relics. They gave me everything but a roast. Bathsheba unwrapped a sandwich. You promised them a recipe again, didn't you? I promised not to cook one. The field ahead buzzed with the nervous energy of first years about to discover whether gravity had personal vendettas. A row of brooms lay on the grass, like forgotten garden tools, and the children stood in a loose clump near them, whispering and shooting wary glances skyward. One of the Hufflepuff girls, Abbott, if he was correct, looked at the brooms with her nose wrinkled. Cassian popped a cherry into his mouth. Nothing like watching 11-year-olds try not to cry while pretending they got what it takes to die for sport. You sure you can judge them? She asked, glancing sideways, still baffled he couldn't fly. He pointed his fork at the field. I am observing to learn how to fly. Let me pace myself. Madam Hooch stormed into view like a gale in boots. Yellow eyes, cropped gray hair, whistle around her neck, and the general air of someone who found most things inadequate. Well, what are you all waiting for? She barked. Broomsticks stand next to one, not behind it, not sitting on it, next to it. Honestly, the first years shuffled into place, brooms at their feet. Harry Potter looked down at his like it might explode. Cassian eyed him, chewing thoughtfully. The boy didn't look scared, just waiting for it to do something. The broom was half dead, twigs poking out like it had been used to clean chimneys. Stick out your right hand, Hooch called, pacing in front of them like a general. And say up. Up, they chorused. Most of the brooms twitched. One flew straight into a face. Another flopped over. Harry's jumped neatly into his hand. Of course it did. Show off. Cassian muttered. Probably had the best training. Hermione's broom wobbled, then flopped over as if insulted. Neville's just lay there like a corpse. His voice trembled as he said, "Up again," quieter this time, and the broom still didn't budge. He gave Madam Hooch a quick, panicked glance, then looked away. "They are not cats," Cassian called. "Stop trying to coax it like it is going to purr," Bathsheba elbowed him. "Let her teach. I am letting her. I am just offering emotional support." Hooch was now demonstrating how not to concuss yourself while mounting. She moved down the row, correcting grips and swatting fingers like it was a fencing class. She stopped in front of Malfoy. "You," she said, squinting. "You've been holding it like that all this time? That is wrong." Cassian snorted tea through his nose. The Prat was prattling on about how he could race a dragon in his backyard, and how he nearly crashed into a Muggle Healy just seconds ago. "Now," Hooch raised her whistle, "when I blow this, kick off. Straight up hover and come back down. Do not show off. Do not drift. Do not die. 3, 2. Neville, in a fit of either courage or misread timing, launched skyward before the whistle touched her lips. Cassian sat up straight. Neville went up like someone had lit a fire under him. 12 feet, 20, 30, arms flapping, eyes wide as dinner plates. "Come back, boy," Hooch bellowed. Cassian winced. "Oh no!" Neville teetered sideways. "Don't you?" Cassian's wand was in his hand before the words were fully formed. "Wingardium, no, wait!" His eyes narrowed. "Gravitas Ascendio." The old variant cracked through the air like a whip, and Neville shot straight up, arms flailing, eyes round with terror. Then froze, suspended midair like a mildly traumatized balloon. The entire class gasped. Madam Hooch's head snapped toward Cassian. "Can you bring him down?" Cassian scratched his temple with the tip of his wand. "Right, of course. Bathsheba, Spongify, if you would be so kind, I would rather not splatter the child in front of witnesses." Bathsheba sighed so strong, it moved the grass. "You are unbelievable," she muttered, casting the softening charm with a flick and a roll of her eyes. Cassian grinned, let the levitation drop. Neville plummeted like a sack of potatoes, hit the cushion with a loud bowing, bounced once, and landed in the grass. Soft, a bit stunned, limbs everywhere, but otherwise intact. Madam Hooch was already kneeling beside him. "You are fine, boy. Bruised pride, maybe a bone or two. Let's get you to Madame Pomfrey." She shot Cassian a look of gratitude, but it felt like being thanked by an eagle scary. "Watch the class, please." Cassian gave a half bow. Delighted. She turned to the rest. "None of you is to move while I take this boy to the hospital wing. You leave those brooms where they are, or you will be out of Hogwarts before you can say, 'Quidditch.' Come on, dear." Neville, looking like he wasn't quite sure if he dreamt the last 5 minutes, hobbled along beside her, one hand cradling his wrist. The second she was out of earshot, Malfoy barked out a laugh. "Did you see his face? The great lump." The other Slytherins snorted and tittered, like it was the best joke they heard all week. Parvati's chin went up, eyes flashing. "Leave him alone, Malfoy. Ooh, sticking up for Longbottom," Pansy said when Parvati turned on Malfoy. "Never thought you would like fat little crybabies, Patil." Malfoy darted forward, snatched something glinting out of the grass. "Oh, look," he said, holding it aloft. That stupid toy his gran sent him. The Remembrall glittered in his palm. "Give that here, Malfoy," Harry said. The chatter cut off like someone had pressed mute. All eyes swung between them. Malfoy smiled slowly. "I think I will leave it somewhere for Longbottom to collect. How about up a tree?" Before Cassian could so much as twitch, Malfoy was on his broom and kicking off the ground. Up he shot, nimble, smug, holding the Remembrall high like a trophy. "Come and get it, Potter." Harry grabbed his broom, hands tight around the handle. His face had that look, half rage, half don't think, just do. He looked at Cassian. "Professor, can you stop him?" Cassian, still chewing on a cherry, shrugged. "I don't know how to fly, but I choose you, Potter. Fly." He already had his wand up, a cushioning charm at the tip of his wand. Harry didn't need another word. He kicked off, and the broom took to the air like it had been waiting for him. Hermione gasped, then hissed, "Madam Hooch said not to move. He will get expelled." Cassian waved her off. "He is already in the air, Granger. Let him finish the thesis before you write the detention notice." He remembered Potter being a Quidditch star from his past life. Was probably trained by best of the best before coming Hogwarts. Or was he a big Quidditch fan? If it was the first, great. He probably knew how to fly. If it was the second. Oh boy, he was in some serious trouble. Still, Cassian couldn't imagine the James Potter's son not being taught how to fly. And besides, Potter had gotten the broom right on his first try. He probably wasn't a stranger to the skies. Malfoy hovered higher, still holding Neville's Remembrall, grin tightening. The moment Harry reached him, the grin faltered. They circled. Harry just angled his broom forward, close enough that Malfoy had to backpedal in the air. "Give it," Harry said. Malfoy tried to smirk. It came out twitchy. "Or what? You will cry?" Harry tilted his broom forward, jerked it into a sudden lunge. Malfoy swore and jolted back, just missing a tree branch. "Mental, you are." Cassian moved to the edge of the field, hands in his pockets, squinting up. Oops, they got heated. Bathsheba passed him a pumpkin pasty. "Don't encourage it." "I am not. I am observing." Above, Malfoy scowled, clearly regretting everything that led to this point. "Fine. Catch it if you can, then." He hurled the Remembrall skyward like a shooting ball and yanked his broom into a dive back to the ground. Harry didn't hesitate. He locked eyes on the ball, small, spinning, dropping fast, and followed it as if it were worth more than his future. "Oh," Cassian muttered, raising his wand. "This is getting dangerous." Harry tucked himself close to the broom, shooting down. The wind tore past him, whipping his hair and tugging his sleeves like it wanted him gone. Cassian tracked him with his wand. Arresto momentum, ready to be fired if the pull-up went wrong. He'd catch the fall before bone met turf caught a flicker of movement on the ground. He saw Hannah Abbott covering her eyes, Ron yelling something lost to the wind. Lavender simply shrieked. Harry reached, fingers out. One shot, one opportunity. The Remembrall slapped into his palm. He yanked the broom up hard and the whole thing bucked, launching him in an awkward arc that ended with him thudding onto the grass. Fingers curled around the Remembrall like it was a prize. Shema swooped. Ron shouted. Parvati screamed again, this time in delight. Cassian strolled over, whistling. "You all right, Potter?" Harry blinked up at him from the ground. "Yeah, good. Thought we would have to start burying first years by week 2. He glanced up at the sky. 10 out of 10 for showmanship. 2 for form. "You land like a sofa." Harry pushed himself up, still clutching the Remembrall. The broom lay a few feet off, twitching. Malfoy. Cassian called lazily, scanning the field. Where did he? Ah, there he goes. Off to cry into Daddy's robes. Malfoy was already storming off, Crabbe and Goyle trailing behind. "Think he will tattle?" Ron asked, jogging up beside Harry. Cassian chuckled, mouth still half full of pastry. "Oh, he will." He stood, brushing crumbs off his coat, then cupped a hand around his mouth. "Draco Malfoy, come back here!" Authority, as he once said, came in many languages. Cassian preferred the language of timing. Chapter 65. Cassian stood, brushing crumbs off his coat, then cupped a hand around his mouth. "Draco Malfoy, come back here." Malfoy froze mid-step, back rigid. He turned like someone had cast Petrificus Totalis. "This isn't your class," he called, aiming for smug. Cracking halfway through, Cassian gave him a nod. "Right, except Madam Hooch left me in charge, which makes me your favorite professor for the next. What, 20 minutes? He motioned him over. "I said, come here." The boy hesitated, weighing defiance against consequences, then stalked back, sneering as if to dare Cassian run his mouth again. Cassian pointed to the space in front of him. "Closer." "I don't want to shout. You are not worth the effort." Malfoy trudged forward, jaw clenched. Cassian stepped around him, hands behind his back. "Explain why you stole a classmate's keepsake, threatened to stash it where he couldn't reach it, dared another to chase you midair, then decided to throw said keepsake from a height that could have killed him. He leaned forward. Be careful, Draco. Your answers might put Daddy in trouble. That did it. Draco's face went taut, eyes flashing. Draco didn't meet his eyes. It was just a joke, Professor. A joke, Cassian repeated slow as if tasting it. Right. I missed the punchline. Was it when Longbottom fell, or when Potter nearly brained himself? I didn't mean for him to fall, Draco said quickly. Cassian tilted his head. No? So throwing something while suspended in midair with no guarantee he could catch it or survive the fall. That was what? A bonding exercise. Malfoy breathed hard from his nose. I didn't think he'd actually go after it. Cassian's smile thinned. So you were trying to destroy the Longbottom heir's heirloom? Draco's shoulders twitched, mouth working. I didn't mean to. Didn't mean to what? Hurl it with enough force to dent a roof tile? Cassian took a step closer. That is odd. Because it looked a lot like you wanted it broken, or lost, or picked up in pieces with Longbottom crying over it. Draco's mouth snapped shut. It was You said it already, Cassian stared at him. But let me entertain it. A classic Slytherin joke, theft, mid-air endangerment, and emotional sabotage. Hilarious. He glanced over his shoulder at Harry and back again. Must have them rolling in the common room. Draco didn't reply. Cassian chuckled. Well, that is 30 points from Slytherin, and 1 week detention. Malfoy snapped his head around. You can't do that. My father will hear about it. Cassian smiled wider. 2 weeks. Dare me more. A voice cut through the field. What is going on in here? McGonagall's cloak flared behind her as she marched across the grass. Her eyes bounced from Malfoy to Harry to the scattered class, and then fixed, of course, on Cassian. Professor Rosier, McGonagall said, in the tone people reserved for murderers and late paperwork. Number Professor Babbling, please. I am not in the mood to decode Professor Rosier. Cassian pulled out a cookie from his pocket. He waved it like it was legal tender. Oh, don't let me interrupt. This is thrilling. Shall I narrate? Bathsheba looked far too calm for someone caught in a Malfoy-initiated chaos storm. Longbottom went up too early. Cassian caught him. No bones broken. Then went on, explaining the rest of the story. Cassian gestured grandly to the sky. He flew, briefly, like a very round, very confused pigeon. McGonagall turned to Harry, who was still holding the Remembrall tight. Mr. Potter, did you chase Mr. Malfoy into the air? Harry opened his mouth, probably to lie, but Cassian cut in. He absolutely did, he said. And it was brilliant. Professor Rosier, she snapped. What? I am not rewarding it. I am just acknowledging that if the boy doesn't end up on a broom professionally, we've all wasted a prodigy. Actually, I am rewarding him. 10 points to Gryffindor. Harry turned faintly pink. Malfoy, meanwhile, tried to speak, but McGonagall held up a hand. Not now. Cassian took another bite of the cookie. For what it is worth, I did issue a punishment. 2 weeks detention. And 30 points from Slytherin. McGonagall blinked. You what? Cassian tilted his head. Did I stutter? She gave a small breath through her nose. You are not authorized to assign detentions to students not in your class. I was in charge, he said, temporarily. That makes me acting authority. McGonagall squinted, probably deciding whether to go with it or argue. Fine, Mr. Potter, come with me. Hermione made a sound like she was winding up for a defense, but Cassian waved her off before she could load the speech. He is not in trouble. He looked at Harry then, back at McGonagall. I may not look like it, but I am still a professor. I told him to fly. If anything happens, it will be on me. Bathsheba took a bite of tart unbothered. So you do admit you don't dress like a professor. Cassian pouted. I meant I am young and charming. You are neither, she said, flat as stone and just as skippable. Harry trailed after McGonagall. The rest of the class stood frozen, half expecting a lightning strike or sudden suspension. Cassian turned to them and clapped twice. Show is over. Lavender raised a hand. Professor, do we still fly? Cassian rolled his eyes. mocking me. Are you, Miss Brown? Told you? Don't know how to fly? Let's all lie down and stare at the sky. Pretend we got talent. A few of them laughed. Half relieved, half still, waiting to see if another broom might take off on its own and chew someone's leg off. The brooms stayed grounded. The students didn't. Lavender dropped with the kind of theatrical sigh that begged attention. Seamus followed, like he meant to nap, and Hermione sat so stiffly it looked like the grass might contaminate her trousers. Cassian flopped back with a grunt. The sky stretched wide above them, clouds drifting lazy and fat across a blue too bright to be trusted. A lone hawk wheeled overhead. Imagine you are flying, he said. Real flying. Wind in your eyes, teeth frozen. Every part of you clenched because the broom is wobbling, and someone's mum is already writing your eulogy. Sounds awful, Parvati muttered. Exactly, he said. Asterisk. 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 Dumbledore's office looked unusually sharp that night, like it caught wind of the argument before it started. McGonagall stood near the hearth again, arms crossed, lips thinner than usual. Snape was pacing. Cassian barely stepped inside before it began. Snape didn't even wait for him to sit. You are shielding him, he snapped at McGonagall. Potter broke a direct order. Cassian shut the door with his boot and made a vague, waving motion. Evening. I am fine, by the way. Thanks for asking. Snape ignored him. Rules apply to everyone. Or is that only true when it is not Gryffindor? McGonagall sighed. First one. Severus. Number no. You don't get to dismiss it. He turned on her. He disobeyed an explicit instruction. Left the ground, stole a broom. Chased a thief, Cassian cut in, wandering to a chair. Bit of context never hurt anyone. Snape's eyes flashed. You encouraged him. I observed, like a responsible adult with no aerial expertise and a treacle tart hangover. McGonagall sighed again. 2. She rubbed the bridge of her nose. Dumbledore hadn't spoken yet. He sat behind the desk, fingers folded, gaze neutral. Snape turned to him now. He should be punished. He went flying and endangered himself and another student. Cassian cocked a brow. If we are playing that game, then surely we are also punishing the kid who lobbed a keepsake. Snape whirled to him. You had no right to issue detention. It wasn't your class. Frankly, I had the patience of a saint, considering the brat nearly turned the pitch into a drop test. That does not. McGonagall cut in. Professor Rosier acted in the capacity he was assigned. Madam Hooch left him responsible for the class. That grants him disciplinary rights. Snape turned sharply. That doesn't extend. I didn't send the boy to Azkaban, Cassian said, legs crossed, arms lazily draped over the armrest. I gave him 2 weeks of wiping Cauldron scum. Might build some character. It is not your place to assign punishments to students who aren't under your purview, Snape snapped. Oh, I see. So if a student lights another on fire during herbology, the professor's job is to take notes and politely wait for the child's head of house to show up. Cassian's brow lifted. That is mental. Dumbledore shifted. He looked over his hands. It is not about your authority in that moment. It is about precedent. Ah, Cassian said, drawing out the word. The real villain of the hour. Professor Rosier, McGonagall warned, though it was more out of habit than heat. No, go on, Cassian said. Let's set a precedent that if someone breaks rules mid-flight, we will wait and draft a committee response. Or better yet, let them off because it is a weekday and the paperwork is a pain. Snape turned on his heel. You show no regard for structure. Structure, Cassian repeated, tapping his chin. Interesting. Because what I saw was a boy commit theft, incite a chase, and nearly kill another kid over a prank. You are exaggerating. I am quoting. Cassian cut him off, pushing himself to his feet. Malfoy launched that Remembrall with all the grace of a trebuchet. Potter caught it in free fall. If he missed, we would be discussing his hospital wing stay, or funeral options. McGonagall's eyes flicked between them. Snape looked ready to throttle someone. I understand the stakes, Snape hissed, but you escalated it. No, I finished it. Cassian didn't move. Would you have preferred I let Malfoy prance off with a pat on the head? There, try not to endanger classmates tomorrow. Or wait for you to show up with a scroll and a frown? Snape stepped closer. You think everything is a stage for your commentary? Cassian smiled. Only the interesting bits. That boy is not your toy, Rosier. No, he is your problem, and I am happy to leave him in your capable hands next time. I will even write you a note. Dear Severus, Malfoy's tried to commit light manslaughter. Yours sincerely, the Muggle pen guy. Dumbledore finally stood. Enough. He glanced at Snape, then McGonagall. We will revisit the discipline process. For now, the punishment stands. Snape looked like he'd bitten into something rotten. He undermines. He acted in the moment, Dumbledore said, eyes fixed. Let's not pretend we wouldn't do the same. McGonagall gave a tiny nod. Snape turned back to Cassian, eyes sharp. This isn't about that boy. It is about you. You walk in here smirking, smug, acting as if the school's rules are guidelines. Cassian blinked. They are. Snape's jaw worked. You want obedience, Cassian said. Get better rules. McGonagall looked like she was seconds from removing her glasses and tossing them at someone. Professor Rosier, that will do. Cassian waved a hand. Tone too casual to be anything but pointed? Fine. So long as he is punished for 2 weeks, let the disciplinary committee sort the rest. I doubt anything will come of it. Hard to find guilt when Daddy's gold funds half the school's plumbing, but, good enough? Snape's mouth curled into a smile like he found rot under a fresh apple. I remember another family decommissioning professor bins with gold as well. Cassian laughed coldly, and that professor proved himself, over and over. Even Master G sent letters asking the headmaster if he would let me go. He turned, fixing Dumbledore with a look that was too calm to be harmless. And what was your response, headmaster? Dumbledore leaned back. Eyes met Cassian's. I told him you were not mine to send. You had unfinished work. Cassian clicked his tongue. You said no? I said you were needed here. Cassian gave a nod, like he was filing it under sentimental but admissible. That is the one. Snape huffed off in a swirl of robes. McGonagall swallowed the third sigh, instead turned and followed without a word. Cassian stayed put, hands in his pockets, coat slightly askew from all the gesturing. He stood before Dumbledore's desk. I decided what to do about the third-floor corridor, he said, flicking a folded bit of parchment from his pocket. My part of the trial, I mean. Chapter 66. Cassian stayed put, standing before Dumbledore's desk. I've decided what to do about the third-floor corridor, he said, flicking a folded bit of parchment from his pocket. My part of the trial, I mean. He dropped a scroll on the table. Right, so here is the thing. This is not the greatest ward in the world. Dumbledore blinked over his teacup. No? Cassian leaned forward, eyes a little wild. Number couldn't remember the greatest ward in the world. He waved a hand. The greatest ward in the world was drawn on a Monday night, under duress, with poor lighting and better company. It had recursive layering, a memory loop, and a spatial fold so tight it made time stutter. But then, he sighed, the rug. Oh, the rug had just witnessed things no furniture should. Cassian pointed at the parchment. So I did my best. I lit a candle, stared into the void, and tried to remember. This is what I got. It is close. It is clever. But it is not that plan. That plan is legend now. Possibly absorbed into the fabric of the rug. No, headmaster. This is just a tribute. Dumbledore set his cup down. And this tribute, what does it do? He shrugged. Basic illusion of light. Makes the corridor look longer, darker, and emptier than it really is. Adds a sense of dread if you are prone to that sort of thing. Also creates a riddle. Dumbledore picked up the scroll and let it roll open. His eyebrows gave a polite twitch. This is perfect, Professor Rosier. This is the level of challenge I was looking for in the first place. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk days slipped by quicker than a ministry budget vote. Malfoy scrubbed cauldrons with a frown etched so deep into his face. 2 weeks of elbow grease and not a single protest past day 3. Not after Daddy Rosier had a little chat with Daddy Malfoy. and came back looking like someone told him. House Rosier might call in a few old debts. Draco turned up quiet after that. Polite, even wiped down the benches after class once. Cassian almost checked his temperature. Harry made the Quidditch team, of course. First year on the team wasn't exactly subtle. McGonagall dropped the news like it was nothing, and Cassian nearly choked on his tea when he heard. Not because it was Potter. Cassian could already tell the boy flew like he was born with a broom jammed up his spine, but because it meant Snape would sulk harder than usual. And he did. All the way through staff meetings, Cassian stopped offering him biscuits. No point wasting good shortbread. Classes kept rolling. Cassian's lectures slid from ancient blood pacts to magical plagues, and how the goblins nearly cursed the entire south wing of Gringotts into a permanent echo chamber. The students started showing up 5 minutes early just to get decent seats. Bathsheba drifted in and out of his rooms like she was doing it for years. Her boots ended up under his bed, her notes on his table, her sleep schedule entirely wrecked. She still scolded him in staff meetings, occasionally with a quill to the ribs, but she never left without borrowing one of his jumpers on the way out. Cassian didn't mind. He found 3 of them folded in his wardrobe, washed, pressed, and smelling faintly of ink and chamomile. Domestic terror. He liked it. Then came Friday. Cassian was mid-lecture, pacing in front of the second years, halfway through a sentence about how a Welsh necromancer once tried to trademark the color black, when Cho Chang raised her hand. "Professor, is it true you can bottle someone's voice?" He stopped walking. "Depends," he said, squinting. "Do you mean legally, magically, or romantically?" A few of the Ravenclaws snorted. One Gryffindor scribbled something as if she was worried it might be on a quiz. Cho hesitated. "Magically." Cassian nodded. "Right? Then yes." Katie Bell raised her hand, chewing on the end of her quill. "Isn't it only djinn and fairies who can bottle voices?" Cassian's smile twitched. Not because she was wrong opposite, really. Because his head still hadn't shaken loose that image. That awful, sticky vision the ancient variation had dropped on him like a bucket of blood. A circle of stone, a mouth stitched shut, and a scream soaked in salt. He nodded. Technically, yes. But magic is flexible, slippery. It is not about the who. It is about the how. You want to trap a voice? It depends on your method. Marcus Belby squinted. Like actual voices? Talking voices? Yes, Marcus. Not metaphorical ones. I am not bottling someone's inner truth and selling it at a poetry reading. Cho's brow furrowed. But how does that even work? Cassian chuckled. It works a bit like Silencio, only ruder. Instead of muting them, it cuts the voice out entirely, neatly, like a spell-cast throat punch. He gave the room a glance, noting who looked intrigued and who looked mildly traumatized. You can think of it like Stupefy. If I knock someone flat with that, they don't get up unless someone helps them, or I let them. This works the same way. Only the caster can lift it. Or someone can find the container where the voice is trapped and break it. Cassian went on, pacing tall to make them nervous. Drawback is, you need a container. But we are magics, aren't we? We can conjure, summon, transfigure, pinch a jam jar off the breakfast trolley if it comes to that. Marcus raised his hand again, cautious now. What kind of container? Cassian paused. Anything that can hold a spell, a bottle, a shell. Someone once used a hollowed-out galleon, bit on the nose, but it worked. Voice stayed in there till someone had the bright idea to snap it open. Eddie Carmichael frowned. So, if someone finds it and breaks it, what? The voice just comes back. Cassian grinned toothy and unbothered. In that case, the bloke it belonged to had already snuffed it. Voice didn't have a body to crawl back into, so it latched onto the room. Screamed for years. Mostly about unpaid debts and someone named Lorna. A few students shifted in their seats. Katie leaned forward. So, wait! If the voice can't go back into the person, it just hangs around. Sometimes. Depends on the magic. Depends on the container. Depends on the magic who did it and whether they knew what they were doing or just flailed a wand and hoped for the best. He tapped his temple with his wand. Same as everything else. Intent, structure, effect. Get it wrong, and you are building a banshee out of bad luck and glassware. Why would anyone do that? Cho asked. What is the point of taking someone's voice? Cassian looked at her. Control, revenge, fear. Bit of a laugh. If you are the sort of person who finds that funny... He started walking again, hands tucked behind his back. I used it on Mr. Malfoy because he was being a prick. I would rather not use it casually, though. So, don't be a prick. He turned halfway, casting a dry look at the lot of them. Belby had gone a little pink. Eddie looked like he was waiting for someone to explain the joke. Marietta stopped breathing entirely. Right? Cassian said, clapping to pull them out of their stupor. Moving on. Voice magic, also known as echo binding. If you want the pretentious name, has been around longer than half your family trees. Fairies do it, sure. Jinn perfected it. Wizards, though? The room watched with bated breath. A few in the history of magics can use it. I am one of them. That landed. Those sitting near front leaned away. Cassian checked the clock in his pocket with a quick glance. That is all. Children. Unless someone has a spare voice and a jar handy. It was funny. Books snapped shut in a staggered chain. Quills were stashed. A few exchanged looks like they weren't entirely sure if what they just heard was legal. Eddie mumbled something about checking the library. Marietta all but bolted. Cho lingered, brow furrowed, as if trying to memorize Cassian's exact phrasing for later dissection. Katie paused at the door. Professor, she said, if someone breaks the container and the voice is still angry. Does it always haunt the place? Cassian leaned on the desk. Depends how long it has been trapped. Some come out screaming. Some forget how to speak. One bloke came back singing the same 3 bars of a sea shanty for 6 years straight. Poor sod that lived there had to be buried with earplugs. Katie paused like she couldn't decide if she was fascinated or scared and wasn't sure which felt worse. She then thanked and left. Cassian stayed at the desk, fingertips drumming, and then the memory returned. Not like a strike this time. Not like it had when it first arrived. It flooded his head a couple of days before term started, while he was halfway through packing. Back then, it had knocked him flat, left him trembling and breathless on the floor. He remembered the heat first. A circle, sand-colored marble, carved symbols like bone against bone. A djinn, not bound, not summoned. Its form was all smoke and symmetry, and something in its eyes looked like it had been watching since before maps were invented. Cassian watched from outside the circle, bound like the man before the djinn. He couldn't move. He could feel the ropes around his wrist. The poor sod kneeling in the center bled from the mouth. Just a thread. A thin crimson line dripping down his chin. His voice was already leaking into the air, curling in silver wisps from between his lips. The djinn stood in front of him, tall as death, arms folded, expression unreadable beneath a face that seemed carved from dusk and fire. Cassian wanted to scream, to intervene, to run, but he was rooted to the ground. The djinn reached down and pulled, and the man convulsed. His voice was ripped out, dragged by invisible force, drawn from the throat in a single scream. Cassian watched as it twisted from the man's mouth into the djinn's hand, coalescing into a tiny glass orb. The man collapsed, silent, still breathing, but broken. And then the djinn turned toward him, Cassian, and it saw him, not glanced, not sensed, saw. Its eyes, gold-ringed and too old to name, met his through the veil of memory, and for the briefest instant, the binding circle shivered. Cassian gasped and blinked. He still shivered remembering it. Even now, seated in an empty classroom, a prickle climbed his spine. Because that wasn't just a memory, that was a gaze. For the first time since he started awakening memories, since the ancient variants began to pop up, someone stared back. Not at the body he was riding like a boat through time. Not at the scene. At him. Cassian Rosier, Chapter 67. One of those mornings. The kind where the castle creaked like it hadn't slept either, and Cassian stretched sideways across the couch with one leg hooked over the armrest, had a pencil balanced on his nose. He'd been at it for 10 seconds. Personal record, 13 and a half. The knock came like a traitor. The pencil slipped, bonked him on the lip, and vanished under the desk. Damn it, he muttered, sitting up. I was about to break my record. He rubbed his nose and sighed. Come in, then. Hermione entered with the caution of someone stepping into the wrong office, or the right one, but far too early. Arms hugged around a book. Big one. Probably something with footnotes. She hovered at the threshold, unsure if she had clearance. Cassian squinted up at her. Miss Granger, he said, brushing graphite from his shirt. Have I finally earned the honor of an intervention? She hesitated in the doorway. No, She hesitated? I had a question. He waved her in. Right? Do sit. Pretend this is a real office. Hermione glanced around. This is a real office. Cassian made a face. I am pretending it is not. She sat down slowly, placing the book on the desk, reverently. Cassian winced. It is a first edition, she said. All serious. A Guide to Foundational Spell Structures, 1362 print. Cassian nodded slowly. Ah, yes. The thrilling edition, with the appendix nobody read and the footnotes that lie. Her eyes narrowed. They don't lie. He leaned back in the chair. Miss Granger, I say this with all the love in my cold little heart. Books lie all the time. That is ridiculous, said Bristling. Books are written by experts, exactly. He raised both eyebrows. Experts with bias, with ministry oversight, with publishers breathing down their necks about shelf space and scandal. Some of the most famously accurate magical texts were written by people who never cast half the spells they described. She looked half horrified, half offended, as if he kicked a librarian. Blasphemy and Gringracies. But the information's been verified, cross-referenced. Cassian nodded. By more people who never tried the bloody magic themselves. You know how many wizards quote the standard book of spells? Grade 3 as if it is divine law. It was written by a woman who thought Cruciatus could be cleansed with lemon water. Hermione blinked. She probably had no idea what Cruciatus was. Cassian pointed at her book. And that is a reprint of a textbook originally funded by a bloodline purity lobby. You think they didn't trim out anything that made Half-Blood Innovations look clever? You think every charm that has ever existed got documented because it worked? Most were picked because they were easy to teach, not because they were powerful. Hermione opened her mouth, then closed it again. So, she said slowly, you think we shouldn't trust books? Cassian snorted. I think we shouldn't worship them. Read them, sure, learn from them, then test what they say like it was scribbled on the loo wall. He nudged a crumpled parchment aside with his foot. The only real test of magic is magic, not margin notes. She frowned, eyes flitting over the bookshelves behind him. Organized, neat, looked like a small nerd temple. You are a professor, she said. Scandalous, isn't it? He grinned. Don't tell anyone. I got a reputation for blasphemy. Her arms folded. Then how do you teach if you don't trust the texts? I teach what works and what didn't work. And the bits that almost worked and left scorch marks on my face? He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. You are clever, Granger. But clever doesn't mean obedient, and it definitely doesn't mean correct. She looked down at her book. I still think books matter. They do. Cassian shrugged. But they are not gospel. They are suggestions, compilations, reflections. The moment you treat one like the absolute truth, you've stopped learning. Hermione didn't argue, but she didn't nod either. Her shoulders stiffened, like she wasn't used to hearing that kind of challenge from adults. At least, not ones who wore their coats inside and used mugs as paperweights. What is the question? Cassian asked, cutting through the pause. You didn't carry that tome all the way down here just to argue about bibliographic honesty. She blinked like she'd forgotten, then straightened. Oh, yes. I was reading about early wand-making rituals. Pre-Ollivander, specifically, the older Eastern European traditions, and I came across something about voice marks. Cassian's brows lifted. Now that is a word I haven't heard in years. Technically, it was old Cassian who heard, but details. Hermione's hands tightened on the book. They are mentioned briefly, but the text calls them lost practice. Says they were used to bind a wand to a specific user's voice. Not their blood or intent, just voice. They weren't lost, Cassian said, sitting back. Just shelved, too specific, too risky. Her expression flickered. So they are real? Oh, absolutely. Voice marks were all the rage during the Wand War of 1972 BCE. Imagine a wand that only responds to your command. Right pitch, right phrasing, down to the inflection. That is impressive. That is also a nightmare, Cassian said. Lose your voice, and the wand goes inert. You get hexed in the throat, your wand is a twig. Say the incantation wrong because your nose is broken. Useless. Whisper when you should have shouted. Boom! Misfire. Hermione's mouth opened, half-formed protest curling on her tongue. He cut her off. Don't mistake complexity for genius. Some magic is complicated because it is clever. Some is complicated because the bloke who made it was stubborn, paranoid, and high on potion fumes. She frowned. But couldn't it be used for security? He said. Sure. That is why they tried it, but the failures outnumbered the successes 10 to 1. People choked mid-duel, got colds, hit puberty. One poor sod got cursed into hiccuping, and his wand lit the drapes every 3rd minute until they smothered him. Hermione winced. Still, isn't there something valuable in exploring it? There is always value, Cassian said. Doesn't mean it belongs in standard practice. She leaned forward. So, you've seen voice-bound wands, he shrugged. Not really, but I've seen other bits trying to do the same thing. Voice-locked wards, mostly. Useless stuff. A muggle walkman could beat it. Hermione squinted, trying to picture it failing. What? Cassian reached into the drawer, pulled out a battered cassette tape, and gave it a shake like it might still hold residual magic, or Rick Astley. You know what a microphone is, Granger. She frowned. Yes! Brilliant. Then you know you can record someone's voice. Play it back whenever. So if your magical lock listens for your voice to unlock, what happens when someone plays your voice back at it? Her mouth opened slightly, brow creasing. He pointed at her. Exactly. Doesn't take a genius. Just a bit of tech and a button. Voice locks don't know if it is really you or a magical dictaphone. Wards never stood a chance. Hermione's brow furrowed. But Muggle technology doesn't work around magic. Everyone knows that. Electronics fail. Radios short out. You can't even get a calculator to function inside Hogwarts. So how could a Walkman or a tape recorder possibly fool a magical ward? It doesn't have to work forever, he said. It just has to work long enough. Hermione hesitated. But few seconds, Granger. That is all it takes. You press play. The device stutters, whines. Maybe the spell around it starts chewing the battery. Doesn't matter, because in those few seconds, the voice plays. The ward hears what it thinks is you, and it opens. That is. She looked like her brain was physically sorting the files. Flawed. Cassian smiled. I believe the term is crap. But yes, magical purists got obsessed with the idea of authenticity. They thought if the voice came from the lungs, it would be unique. Soulprint, some of them called it. He made air quotes with one hand, already sounding bored. Turns out, magic is not that sentimental. It hears the sound, checks the parameters, moves on. You can fool it? Hermione sat back slightly, arms tightening around her book. That is ridiculous. If voice magic can be bypassed that easily, then it shouldn't be used for anything important, he said, tossing the tape back into the drawer. It clacked against a tin of old sugar quills. They tried layering it. Voice plus wand core signature plus emotional state plus blood resonance. Still beatable, still a nightmare to calibrate. If you are even a bit off sniffly, tired, angry, the spell says, not you and locks you out of your own bloody vault. Vaults use them. For about a decade in Bavaria, then someone used a phonograph and half the noble houses started suing each other. It was chaos. Lovely to read about. terrible to live through, I imagine. Hermione looked down at her book, feeling betrayed by ink and paper. But the logic behind it makes sense. Cassian tilted his head. So does communism. Do you know why it doesn't work? She blinked. Number, he sighed. Are you familiar with the term pejoration, Miss Granger? Another shake of the head. It is sometimes called semantic deterioration or degradation. He sat back, boot tapping against the desk leg. Right. It is what happens when a word starts off perfectly respectable, then somewhere along the line, people start using it like it got a rash. Hermione stared at him, unsure whether he was about to insult her or start a sociology lecture. Take spinster. Used to mean someone who spun thread. That is it. Perfectly honest job. Then somewhere around the time everyone decided women should marry or combust, it turned into an insult, he gestured vaguely. Or hysterical. Came from the idea that women's wombs made them mad. Very charming bit of etymology, that. She looked mildly horrified. And then there is communism, he went on, picking up a bit of parchment and folding it. Beautiful idea. Share your biscuits. Don't hoard the milk. Then it turns into a power grab buried in bureaucracy with a side of gulag. He folded again, forming until the paper shaped a sickle. Now it is a dirty word. Even when you just want to share biscuits. Hermione frowned. But what does that have to do with voice marks? He pointed the paper sickle at her. Same principle. Idea wasn't bad. The execution turned it into a cautionary tale. Wands that only listen to your voice sounds clever. All it took was one clever bastard with a mirror charm and a stolen syllable, and half the continent panicked. Next thing you know, people started calling it cursed, too risky, too unstable. Boom, pejoration. The idea went from innovation to punchline? She opened her mouth, reconsidered, scratched, and finally glanced down at the book. I just thought maybe it was forgotten. Cassian gave a short laugh. Magic rarely forgets. Ollivander probably has a dozen of them stuffed in a shoebox somewhere, humming in soprano. I've heard of fingerprint wands, too. Equally stupid. Thought they could key spells to the ridges of your thumb, as if holding your wand wrong mid-duel wasn't dangerous enough. Now imagine it doesn't work unless you press the bloody thing correctly. Hermione stared, utterly astonished. Don't let novelty fool you, Miss Granger, he went on. You treat every bit of magic the same way? Ask one question. Is this useful to me? If yes, keep it. If not, bin it. No points for sentiment. Chapter 68. That was the first of many knocks. Granger kept showing up like she was trying to personally unwrite every sentence. Cassian ever muttered about books being full of lies. He didn't mind. It was like being pestered by an overachieving moth. Bright, relentless, prone to catching fire if she got too close to something ancient. He would correct her footnotes with a biscuit in one hand and tease her margins with questions that made her frown so hard he swore it left creases in the page. She thought she was studying history. Really, she was studying him. Each visit came with a challenge tucked under her arm and an eyebrow arched. Cassian was used to it. He kept a running tally of how many times she tried to prove him wrong. So far, he was winning by smugness alone. She got smarter about it, though. Switched tactics. Sometimes she would act like she just happened to be passing. Other times, she would walk in mid-sentence, waving an annotated scroll like it held divine truth. He gave her tea, mostly to see how long it took before she forgot about the book and started arguing for fun. And then came Halloween. Too many candles, too few serviettes. Pumpkin-themed everything. Floating jack-o'-lanterns hovered so low that someone's hat could catch fire. And the ceiling had done its usual trick of matching the sky. This time, a stormy swirl of clouds and moonlight, with occasional thunder just for drama. Rows of tables groaned under a mess of sweets, roasts, and questionable orange-colored dishes. Cassian shook his head, watching students shovel sweets into their faces, like famine was due next week. He could appreciate the effort. What he couldn't get used to was the symbolism. In the British magical world, Halloween also marked Voldemort's fall. Big cheer. End of war. A celebration pinned to one of the bloodiest nights in magical history. Back in his world, it was plastic skeletons. discount cobwebs, and pensioners in vampire capes handing out Haribo with mild suspicion. Here, the ghosts were real, and sometimes they even tried to drink your juice. Cassian reached for the tankard at his elbow, sniffed it suspiciously, then sipped. Butterbeer. He scanned the hall, eyes drifting past pointy hats, drooping spiderwebs, and one particularly miserable-looking flan. The Weasley twins were plotting something in plain sight. Excellent form. Angelina was mid-glare. Also excellent. Bathsheba sat next to him, already halfway through her second helping of roast potatoes and ignoring him as such that required effort. "Do you think anyone noticed the cursed pumpkin?" he asked, not looking at her. Bathsheba didn't glance up. "Which one? The one over Snape's head?" Her head whipped round so fast Cassian nearly flinched. She zeroed in on the pumpkin floating over Snape's head, squinted, then gave a quiet snort that turned into an actual giggle. Not the polite kind either. Sudden and a bit evil. She was clearly imagining how it would go if the thing exploded mid-sentence. Cassian figured the mental image probably included gravy stains and a strong disciplinary review. He chewed on a roasted parsnip and muttered, "3 Galleon says it is laced with shriekroot. Goes off when he frowns." She wiped her fingers on a napkin. "So it will detonate in the next 2 minutes. "More like 30 seconds, he said, glancing at the tension building in Snape's jaw across the staff table. "Look at that clench. He is ready to bite the stem off." Bathsheba rolled her eyes, but Cassian could see the anticipation burning behind them. Snape, blissfully unaware, sat glaring at his pumpkin pasty. He hadn't noticed the pumpkin yet, which was a shame, really. Cassian liked to watch the exact moment a man realized his doom hovered overhead in a seasonally festive container. Dumbledore, naturally, looked delighted. Probably knew, probably enchanted at himself. The man had that exact twinkle tonight. The sort that meant trouble had been allowed, possibly encouraged, but only if it resulted in life lessons and mild chaos. A low huff beside them signaled McGonagall. She sat stiffly, leaning in. "Are you plotting something? Again, Professor Rosier?" Cassian smiled pleasantly, slicing into meat. "Me, Professor. I am simply enjoying the festivities." Bathsheba sipped her drink. Cassian thought the highlight of the evening would be the pumpkin over Snape's head. Rigged to explode the moment someone muttered, "Cauldron grease with enough venom," but he was wrong. The doors slammed open. He didn't even look up at first, just chewed on the rest of his parsnip. These things rarely merited rushing. A moment later, though, he was proven wrong again. Quirrell came sprinting down the aisle, perhaps mistaking the Great Hall for a Quidditch pitch. Turban Askew, face chalk white, the whole lot trembling like he just kissed a troll. Quirrell stumbled to the staff table and choked out, "Troll, in the dungeon, thought you ought to know." Then he fainted, right there, full splat onto the stone. Cassian winced, then announced, "Ah, style points. 3, dramatic flair, 10. Still, he shifted forward in his seat. Trolls weren't a joke. Not when Castleful of Children were involved. A few students screamed. Someone knocked over a goblet. The hall went from Halloween jolly to near chaos in 3 seconds flat. Cassian watched the fear spread like spilt ink. Chairs scraping. Kids twisting around, whispers snapping into panic. Silence! Cassian's eardrums rung. It worked, though. The students froze mid-breath. Dumbledore scanned the room. "Prefects and professors, lead your houses back to their dormitories immediately." Before anyone else could move, something else happened. Cassian swore he heard that ridiculous cartoon sound, puo. Right before the cursed pumpkin finally gave up gravity and dropped, it exploded right on Snape's greasy head. It exploded in a wet, orange splat that sent pulp splattering across 3 feet of polished table, sending bits of stringy orange straight down his collar. For one glorious second, no one breathed. Snape stood there, rigid as a tombstone, dripping pumpkin like it was part of his hair care routine. Might have been for all anyone knew. A wet splat echoed across the hall as a chunk of pumpkin hit the floor beside him. Nobody moved. Somewhere near the Hufflepuff table, a first-year sneezed and immediately tried to disappear into her robes. Draco Malfoy looked like he wanted to laugh, but couldn't decide if the risk to his bloodline was worth it. Neville Longbottom gone sheet white. Like the trauma of witnessing a fruit-based assassination had shattered what remained of his nerves. Kettleburn, the calmest by far, kept chewing his steak and huffed. "That is going to stain," he said, watching a rivulet of pumpkin juice trail ominously down Snape's sleeve. Bathsheba buried her face in her goblet, shoulders shaking. Professor Sprout was failing not to smirk behind her serviette. Flitwick looked like he was mentally composing a haiku. Even Trelawney, who spent the first half of dinner describing everyone's imminent demise via turnip, was staring as though a prophecy had just fulfilled itself. Snape, meanwhile, did nothing. He merely stood, perfectly still, emotionless, like a man who had decided to internalize this betrayal so deeply he might one day turn into a potion. The shock, the troll, the fainted defense professor, and the pumpkin-flavored catastrophe all collided into something so absurd Cassian snorted a laugh, a proper, involuntary sort of snort that would have got him smacked with a napkin if Bathsheba had any left. Snape's eyes snapped to him first. Of course, they did. Cassian was the only person within 10 feet not frozen in horror or hurrying to look useful. "Sorry," Cassian managed to say, breathing loudly to suppress the laughter. "The pumpkin just..." He gestured vaguely toward the dripping mess that used to be Snape's hair. "I mean, look at you. You are glowing, girl. Whatever you use for that hair?" Snape didn't blink, just stood there, murder in his posture, strands of pulp sliding down his collar. He looked like a cursed salad. McGonagall's hand clapped against the table. "Professor Rosier!" she hissed. To Cassian's relief, laughter spread to students. Snape, of course, caught the sound like a dog catches scent. His eyes swept the great hall, daring anyone to breathe wrong. Then Dumbledore, far too casual for a man about to be hexed in the crossfire, waved his hand. "To your common rooms. Now, Professor Rosier, you will guide Slytherin, since Professor Snape has had an accident." Cassian clapped his hands. "Excellent. Field trip, children. Let's make it snappy before your head of house drowns in pumpkin." Snape's gaze was venomous, like he was updating a kill list. Cassian flashed a grin on the way out. "If you find seeds in your boot later, Severus, do let me know. I hear they are lucky." The Slytherins didn't argue. When a troll gets mentioned and a professor goes down like a sack of wet towels, even the proudest pure-bloods learn to queue. Cassian herded them with lazy gestures and a few pointed looks. A second year tried to linger near the pudding table. He got steered by the collar. Cassian led the green and silver train through the corridors, occasionally nudging stragglers. Once they rounded the last corner and the entrance to the common room opened, Cassian gave them a little wave. Inside, no fireballs, no summoning circles, and if anyone gets cursed, try not to bleed on the upholstery. A couple of them mumbled something vaguely grateful. Most just bolted. Cassian turned toward the long corridor. He squinted, searching the dim hall for answers, then muttered, "Now that I think about it, why the hell did Dumbledore send the Slytherins to their common room when Quirrell said the troll was in the dungeon?" He made his way down the dungeon corridor, eyes scanning the stone walls for anything even mildly troll-shaped. Nothing. No roar, no smell, not even a misplaced footprint. Either Quirrell had hallucinated it, or the troll had excellent stealth training. As he looped past the first-floor staircase, he spotted 2 heads ducked behind the far archway, barely visible in the shadows. Messy, jet-black hair, and Ron's unmistakable mop of orange. Cassian narrowed his eyes and kept walking until he was close enough to loom. "What the hell are you doing?" he asked, more annoyed than alarmed. Harry flinched. Ron jumped. Both looked like they'd been caught nicking sweets, not hiding from a 12-foot beast. "Mr. Potter, Mr. Weasley," Cassian said, unimpressed. "Out for a dungeon crawl, are we?" Chapter 69. Mr. Potter. "Mr. Weasley," Cassian said, unimpressed. "Out for a dungeon crawl, are we?" Ron scrambled to his feet. "We were, heading back. But then, Hermione, she doesn't know about the troll. She is in the loo." Cassian stared at them, mouth parting slightly. You left a girl in the bathroom while a troll is on the loose? Harry shot a look at Ron, panicked. We didn't leave her. She didn't know. We were going to find her. Cassian sighed a tired breath and looked over his shoulder for a miracle that wasn't there. Brilliant. Sending them alone was a gamble. If the troll was still loose in the corridors, they'd only panic and might blunder straight into it. But if it really was in the bathroom, dragging 2 first years along would be reckless. He hesitated, torn between dangers, but leaving them behind felt worse. In the end, the safest choice was to keep them close. He turned. Right? Show me. Ron blinked. You are coming. Cassian looked at him, incredulous. Yes, Weasley. I thought I would let you two handle it. Maybe throw a quill at it. See who blinks. Seeing the blank look, he jerked his chin. Move. They didn't argue. They ran. The trip to the girls' loo wasn't long. 5 corridors, 2 half-skids, and 1 very near collision with a suit of armor. Cassian was already regretting not bringing a mask or, better, a shovel. There was a distinct stink in the air now. Sharp, sour, and heavy. Not a lavatory scent. Worse, a troll. As they neared the corner, a crash shook the tiles. One of the sinks inside the girls' loo screamed its death rattle. Something grunted. Something huge. The door had been torn off its hinges. The stone threshold was cracked. Inside, the troll loomed. Gray, leathery, and profoundly stupid-looking, its back to them, club raised midair. Hermione was cornered near the last stall, frozen, clutching the edge of the basin for her dear life. Before Cassian could even move, Harry yelled, "Look here, you big oaf! Come after me if you dare!" The troll stopped mid-swing, one thick foot scraping sideways as it turned, blinking at Harry like he just insulted its mum. Cassian didn't wait. He stepped in front of the duo, wand up, quick flick, Glacium. The spell sparked blue and snapped off the troll's shoulder like rain on stone. Lovely, he muttered. We are dealing with thick skin and thicker skull. Another flick. Confringo, that one hit square in the chest. Troll stumbled a step, snorted, then sneezed like it had smelled its own armpit. No burn! Barely a dent. Cassian sidestepped, pulling the 2 behind, as the troll's club whooshed past and cracked a basin in 2. Hermione scrambled sideways, clutching the wall. Harry and Ron bolted left, flanking the troll without any real plan other than not dying. The creature turned, growling, swiping its club across the broken tiles. Reducto! Cassian shouted a stronger spell, this time aimed at the creature's leg. It bounced off the shin. Oh, what is that leg made of? Petrified meatloaf. Harry ducked under a swing. Ron tripped over his own foot and smacked into the wall. The troll bellowed and lurched forward, club raised. Hermione snapped. Do something! Ron's wand jerked up. Wingardium Leviosa? Cassian was already shouting. It is Leviosa, not. Don't add a bloody consonant. Hermione echoed him from the floor. It is Wingardium Leviosa! Ron's grip tightened. He shouted it again, cleaner this time. Wingardium Leviosa, the troll's club twitched, then lifted. Up, straight up. Troll blinked at it like it was mugged by gravity. It hovered there, then Ron lost control of his spell. The club dropped, straight onto the troll's head. It made a sound like a pumpkin splitting under a boot. The troll wobbled, stared, then dropped, legs buckling as it face-planted. Face first into the mess. Silence. Cassian straightened slowly, wand still raised. Bits of ceiling dust drifted through the air like lazy snow. Someone's shoes squelched in a puddle. Harry leaned over, breathing hard. Ron looked pale. Hermione was pressed into the wall, cheeks blotchy, eyes wide. Cassian stepped around the unconscious troll, sidestepping the troll spit. He looked down at the mess of face and club and slowly let out a breath. Well, he said, that is one way to defeat a troll. Harry wiped his face on his sleeve. Is it dead? Cassian crouched, tapped the troll's skull with the end of his wand. Dull thunk. Nope, brain is still rattling around in there, probably looking for the exit. Hermione was still clutching the sink. Ron stared at his wand, surprised it could do that. I didn't think it would work. Neither did I, Cassian said, dusting off his sleeve. But I am thrilled to be wrong. Mark the date. Harry glanced at Hermione. Are you all right? She nodded stiffly. Her hands trembled. Cassian waved a hand. Right, no time for hugs. We got a troll in a loo and 3 students who should be upstairs. That is a paperwork nightmare. Before they could leave, 2 things happened. First, Cassian felt it, like someone flicked a switch behind his eyes. Magic shifted in him. Familiar, strange, and utterly textbook. His mastery on Wingardium Leviosa jumped a level. It wasn't the same as casting it himself over and over. This was from teaching it. This kind of increase usually took weeks, a few dozen classroom hours. This felt like a cheat code. That was odd. Not unwelcome, but odd. Second, McGonagall swept into the ruined bathroom with the energy of a woman fully prepared to ban students from existence. Snape followed, looking like he scented blood and wanted to bottle it. Quirrell trailed behind, still trembling, turban half askew, wide-eyed as if expecting the troll to resurrect. The 3 of them stopped dead. One, very unconscious troll. 1 toilet in several pieces. 3 students smeared with more grime than could be justified. And Cassian, McGonagall's gaze snapped to him, then to 3 students. Explain yourself, right now. Hermione stepped forward. It was my fault, Professor McGonagall, she said, fast and firm. I was looking for the troll. I read about them, and I thought I could handle it. Harry and Ron came to stop me. Small, stiff, still shaking a little, but refusing to look away. She stood straight. McGonagall's eyes narrowed. Miss Granger, what possessed you to think? No, we will address that later. She turned her attention on Harry and Ron. You 2 left your dormitories to follow her. Yes, said Harry, only that. If they hadn't found me, I would be dead now. They even fetched Professor Rosier. Harry and Professor Rosier managed to slow the troll and Ron knocked it out with its own club. It was about to finish me off when they arrived, Hermione added. Harry and Ron tried to look as though this story wasn't new to them. Well, in that case, said Professor McGonagall, staring at the 3 of them. Miss Granger, you foolish girl. How could you think of tackling a mountain troll on your own? Hermione hung her head. Miss Granger, 5 points will be taken from Gryffindor for this, said Professor McGonagall. I am very disappointed in you. If you are not hurt at all, you would better get off to Gryffindor Tower. Students are finishing the feast in their houses. Hermione nodded, hanging her head low. McGonagall turned to Harry and Ron. Well, I still say you were lucky, but not many first years could have taken on a full-grown mountain troll. You each win Gryffindor 5 points. Professor Dumbledore will be informed of this. You may go. They hurried out of the chamber. McGonagall opened her mouth. Her brow twitched. Professor Rosier? Cassian gave a shrug. Caught them halfway through a heroic rescue attempt. Not ideal timing, granted. I followed them. Arrived just in time to help. Snape's eyes were on the troll. You let students? He began. Cassian cut him off, gesturing a hush with one hand like swatting a fly. Didn't let anything. Just... Okay? Snape's jaw moved, like it wanted to file a complaint. Honestly, Cassian muttered, do I look like someone who herds children into troll territory for fun? No, don't answer that. Well, Snape was barely listening to him. He looked too excited about the troll to argue about anything else once McGonagall gave him permission to dissect it. He didn't say anything, just leaned forward like the mess on the floor had whispered sweet nothings to him. Right, Cassian said, stepping over whatever gooey covered the ground. And that is my cue. He left before someone handed him a mop. No thanks. Not even for 10 points to effort. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk as he entered his room. Bathsheba was already there, perched on the arm of the chair, flipping through something that looked suspiciously like one of his lesson plans. Troll is down, Cassian said, shedding his coat on a chair. Toilet is ruined. Snape is wet. You are welcome. She didn't look up. Snape is what? Cassian rubbed his face with both hands. I don't know how else to explain the expression. McGonagall said he could dissect the troll for potions. He looked thrilled. Got that look again, you know. She huffed a laugh, shaking her head, then closed the folder. You were gone a while. Ah, yes. Took a detour through the worst group project in Hogwarts history. Potter, Weasley, and Granger tried their hands at troll hunting. Managed not to die, which I count as a win. He threw himself onto her with all the coordination of a flailing wardrobe. She kicked him off without blinking. He hit the floor with a grunt and a flurry of limbs, landing hard on his side. Cold, Cassian wheezed from the rug, arms splayed, glaring up like she'd just betrayed a sacred peace treaty. Bathsheba didn't dignify that with a reply. Just slid off the couch and onto him, dragging the blanket as she went. It half covered his legs by the time she landed, elbow jammed somewhere near his ribs. He groaned theatrically, wrapping an arm around her waist and tugging her closer. You think a troll could manage its way from the dungeons up to the first floor girls' loo without at least 3 people noticing the smell? Her head was tucked under his chin, hair tickling his collarbone. Doubt, she mumbled. Thought so. He kissed the top of her head, fingers playing absently with the edge of her shirt. So why did Quirrell say it was in the dungeons then? Chapter 70. Why did Quirrell say it was in the dungeons then? Bathsheba hummed, but didn't answer. Her head was still tucked under his jaw, fingers idly tracing something on his chest. Maybe a rune, maybe a to-do list, maybe the death of the Roman Empire. Hard to tell with her. She went quiet like that sometimes when something bothered her. Cassian knew the rhythm of it by now. All right, he said. What is the theory? Bathsheba didn't meet his eye. If Quirrell got it wrong, it means he wanted the staff out of the way. Or at least not where the troll actually was, which was the first floor loo, Cassian muttered, rubbing a thumb against his temple. Popular spot tonight. She didn't smile. He squinted up at the ceiling. It had a water stain shaped like a toad, foreshadowing. Maybe. Could have been panic, he offered. He is not exactly a steel trap under pressure. Even panic gets the floor right, she murmured. He said dungeon, said it clearly. Cassian sighed through his nose. That itch at the back of his brain got worse. You think he brought the troll in? She shrugged. Would. Explain a lot. He squinted. Might have lost control of the thing mid-transfer. Trolls weren't known for grace. Couldn't charm one into quiet. Cassian knew Quirrell was planning to bring one in. Part of that idiot-proof secret room of the 3rd floor secret club? Heard it himself when Dumbledore asked. Quirrell had even sounded proud, like hiring a 12-foot sledgehammer was his idea of strategic brilliance. Cassian hadn't thought much of it at the time. Just another crazy plan in the Tower of Please, let no child survive this trial. But now, a troll had smashed its way through Hogwarts plumbing, and the timing, the location, none of it added up. He only had a vague hunch and the troll incident. Nothing concrete, nothing that would pass for proof in any respectable dueling court, but Cassian couldn't tell Bathsheba. Dumbledore had been clear, absolutely not. You think Dumbledore knew? Bathsheba kept doodling a love letter on his skin. He asked me to lead Slytherin to the dungeons, Cassian muttered, when the troll was supposed to be there. Still nothing, not even a scoff. That was worrying. I mean, I know he is a bit fond of chaos, Cassian went on, eyes fixed on the ceiling stain. But unless he wanted Slytherins practicing troll evasion for house points, I don't see the logic. Bathsheba pushed herself upright, blanket falling around her waist. Her hair was a mess of ink-dark strands, one of his jumpers slipping off her shoulder. She didn't seem to notice. You don't trust him? She asked. Cassian blinked at her. Dumbledore? She nodded. I trust him to lie artfully and occasionally throw children at problems he should probably solve himself, Cassian said, sitting up with a grunt. So yes, in the limited way one trusts a theatrical arsonist. Bathsheba gave him a flat look. That is not an answer, Cassian shrugged. He told me to bring the kids downstairs. Quirrell says there is a troll in the dungeon. He rubbed the back of his neck. The spot was sore. He was probably straining his neck just to avoid coming face to face with the troll's belly. Yeah, belly. Either the headmaster is hoping to control the population or he knew the troll was never there. Bathsheba pushed him down, locking him between her legs, hands braced on either side of his head. Probably knew, she said, eyes narrowed. There is little that goes under Dumbledore's nose in this castle. Cassian looked up at her, wincing. You are a lot more terrifying when you are right side up. Can you at least pretend I've got bones? You do. She shifted her weight to make it worse. They are currently groaning under my thigh. He groaned properly now, head thunking back against the floor. Excellent. Murdered by thighs. Her gaze had gone sharp, still chasing the idea through the dark. I am serious. You think he didn't have portraits watching every corridor the moment Quirrell started screaming? Cassian winced and pointed up. Could we take this theorizing somewhere not made of stone? She kissed his lips. Fierce, hot, no warning. No, she muttered against his mouth. You are hot when you are in pain, and scheming. Cassian made a muffled noise that might have been protest or agreement. Hard to tell. One hand slid to her waist, the other found the back of her knee and gave it a tug, pulling her down, harder on top of him. She made a small sound, indignant, pleased, probably both, and bit his lip for the trouble. Asterisk, asterisk, when he woke up the next morning, Cassian wanted to die. Not in the dramatic, existential sort of way. More in the my spine has liquefied, and I might be part of the floor now, sort of way. He was still on the floor. Bathsheba was still on him. Worse, their combined effort at body heat had dried into something tacky and unholy across his back. His vest felt like parchment left in the rain. He shifted and immediately regretted it. A muscle in his side twinged like it had forgotten how to exist. His neck cracked so loud, it could wake the castle. Bathsheba didn't move. Probably dead, or pretending. Either option was valid. Cassian let out another miserable groan. We are disgusting. Her answer was a soft snore. He reached and patted the nearest bit of her. You are complicit in this crime against hygiene. Just so we are clear. She didn't stir. Typical. He got the troll, the children, and the floor rash. She got warmth and plausible deniability. He rolled her off like a sack of potatoes and dragged himself upright. His back popped in 3 separate places, socks still on, one sock inside out. His wand had vanished somewhere beneath the pile of discarded blanket and humanity, probably in a crevice. Right? Morning sorted. He stumbled toward the sink in the corner and caught his reflection. Hair looked like it'd been hexed mid-storm. His vest properly wrinkled, half damp, eyes bloodshot. He looked like the prelude to a cautionary tale. Behind him, Bathsheba groaned and flopped onto her back, arm draped over her eyes. What time is it? Cassian checked the window. Late enough to be suspicious, early enough to regret everything. She sighed and kicked the blanket off with one foot. I hate you. Good. That means I am winning. She squinted at him through a curtain of hair. You look terrible. He bent his back. I am aware the floor was unkind. Serves you right. Who collapses mid-conspiracy? I was seduced, he said flatly, by a woman with violent thighs. Bathsheba rolled onto her side and flicked a pen at his head. It missed. Barely. Cassian rinsed his face with cold water. Somewhere above, a plumbing charm clicked into life with a cough. You think Dumbledore is actually going to mention the troll thing again? He asked, voice muffled in the towel. Nope, she yawned. He will let the whole school think it was a tragic one-off. One rogue creature, conveniently timed. Nothing to see here. Cassian dropped the towel. Of course he will. He flopped onto the edge of the couch. You reckon we are done with surprises for the week? Bathsheba raised an eyebrow. You've worked here how long? He grunted. Optimism is a disease. She kicked him in the thigh, lightly, meaning she loved him. He had to show his love as well. So, he carried her to the bathroom and chucked her into the basin, clothes and all. There was a splash, a shriek, and a slap of limbs against porcelain. It is cold, she yelped midair. Oops, Cassian said, without an ounce of remorse. She came up soaked and swearing, hair plastered to her forehead, shirt clinging in unfortunate ways. He had half a second to feel proud before her hand shot out, grabbed his wrist, and yanked. Don't you, bloody hell. Water hit hard. He landed half on, half in, knees knocking against the basin's edge as she dragged him in by force and vengeance. Cassian sputtered, blinked the water out of his eyes, and grabbed the edge for leverage. Are you possessed? You started it. I started civilization. This is war. Bathsheba shulled her until his head dunked under again. He came up coughing, hair dripping, coat ruined. She laughed, with zero grace, just teeth and breath, and full-bodied amusement as she leaned back against the basin wall like a victorious general in soaking socks. He stared at her, deadpan. Are you done? House elves are going to salt this room. Not yet, she said, and dunked his head again. He came up with a hand on her hip and dragged her down into his lap, sloshing water over the sides. She didn't resist, mostly because she was too busy trying not to laugh into his face. He hooked an arm around her waist. Now that you've staged a minor flood in the name of petty vengeance, shall we call this bath concluded? She wiped her face with the end of his sleeve. You dunked me. You threw me. You dunked me while I was still gloating, which is why it was justified. He narrowed his eyes. Bold words for someone soaked. She snorted. Water splashed again. The basin was too small for 2 adults and 1 grudge. One of them was going to get bruised, probably both. She tipped her head back, hair trailing along his shoulder, steam rising off her skin now that the charm had warmed the water. What are we even doing? Being profoundly irresponsible, he said. Thought so. They sat there, back to chest, breathing heavy. Chapter 71. Snape looked like someone had slipped lemon juice into his morning tea, but with just the faintest glimmer of smugness under the scowl. Probably sniffed a bit of troll spleen before bed. That would lift his mood for at least a month. Cassian lifted his mug. Good to see you dry, Severus. Snape didn't answer. At the Gryffindor table, Weasley was claiming he distracted the troll by throwing its own snot at it, which didn't even make sense biologically. Cassian watched their table. Granger hadn't touched her breakfast. Potter was whispering something to her. She nodded eventually. She clearly felt both grateful and guilty. That wasn't a good combination for a 12-year-old. Cassian considered reminding her that her friends hadn't been in danger because of her, but because they'd wanted to help her. There was a difference. He didn't correct her when she took the blame, as he realized it was a growing moment for her, and he was even a little proud to see Granger lying to a professor, McGonagall of all people. Still, if it started to turn into something ugly, he knew he'd have to step in. That kind of guilt, if left unchecked, could harden into something dangerous. The sort that drove a child to overcompensate. He could already see it. A girl who would triple-check her every decision, never to trust her gut again. Who'd throw herself between danger and the people she cared about, not because she was fearless, but because she refused to feel this helpless again. It could make her brilliant, resourceful, and utterly exhausting to herself. Asterisk, 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 the 3rd of November was cold enough to make Cassian rethink the whole open-air sports tradition. Again, he sat hunched in the professor's box, coat collar up, scarf wrapped like a tactical defense, and a look on his face that said he would rather be reading cursed Sumerian tablets than watching teenagers throw themselves off brooms. Wait, that wasn't a good comparison. He would rather read them any day. Bathsheba, seated beside him with a thermos that suspiciously steamed of something stronger than tea, nudged his arm. You still don't like it? She asked, just as Lee Jordan's voice rang out, introducing the new Gryffindor Seeker. Cassian huffed like a kid dragged to church on Sunday morning. It is a game designed to glorify Seekers. McGonagall was 3 seats down, tartan hat at maximum fluff, eyes already sparkling with unholy Gryffindor pride. Cassian said it like he either didn't notice her or didn't care. She was the kind of fan who treated Quidditch like war strategy. One wrong word, and she would have him hexed into the next House Cup. What do you mean? She asked. In hush, because Cassian's face already had that look, half smug, half tired of everyone else's nonsense. He shrugged. Game continues until a Seeker catches the snitch. Snitch is worth 150 points. So unless one team got that exact margin of lead or more, which they rarely do, the Seeker decides everything. She blinked at him. That is the point, isn't it? It is like watching 14 musicians play a symphony, but the bloke with the triangle wins if he dings it first. He leaned forward a little. They could be 50 points up, 2 bludgers to the face, an arm dangling off, and none of it matters. If Seeker sneezes on the snitch, they win. Bathsheba sipped her suspicious tea. So what? You want it to be fair. I want it to make sense, Cassian muttered. Below them, the teams shot out onto the pitch in a blur of red and green. The crowd roared. Cassian winced. Lee Jordan's voice cracked through the air. Names were shouted. Stats no one cared about blasted across the stands. And somewhere a third year released a lion-shaped charm that promptly tried to eat a snake banner. Cassian barely glanced at it. Great. Another symbolic murder. Bathsheba nudged him. You are being grumpy. It is a tradition and fun. Cassian turned to look at her like she just confessed to enjoying midterm grading. Really? It is fun to watch a game that might never end. Okay? Now I get your point. Below them, the brooms shot across the pitch in erratic arcs, chasing after a ball half the stadium couldn't even see. The quaffle got past. Bludgers got dodged. A Slytherin beater nearly took out his own keeper. Cheers erupted every few seconds. No one really tracking the score, just reacting to whatever Jordan shouted loudest. Cassian took another sip and grimaced. And they say history is chaotic. Bathsheba leaned into him. You hate this less than you pretend. Don't slander me, he said. I am entirely consistent in my contempt. Below, Marcus Flint elbowed a Gryffindor chaser so hard it knocked the poor girl sideways off course. The stands howled. Half an outrage, half an encouragement. No foul was called. Cassian gestured at the pitch. That was assault. Bathsheba didn't even flinch. That was Quidditch. He glanced at Madame Hooch, squinting through her flying goggles. The rules are a rumor, and someone is definitely going to the hospital by the end. Bathsheba raised her thermos. Cheers to that! He took another swig from his own, the spiced warmth doing a poor job of compensating. A roar went up as Fred, or maybe George, Cassian couldn't be arsed to keep them straight, dodged a bludger and spun midair. A Gryffindor in the crowd let off a charm that fired red sparks over the pitch, promptly getting hexed by a very fed-up Ravenclaw sixth year. Then, like someone yanked a string, the entire stadium leaned forward at once. The snitch had appeared, glimmering just above the Slytherin goalpost before vanishing again into a blur of motion. Harry Dove. Then, Harry's broom started to wobble. Cassian squinted. That is not wind. The broom pitched left, then right, too sharp, like it had decided to throw him off mid-flight. Harry clung to it with both hands, legs kicking as the broom bucked under him. Below, the rest of the players hadn't noticed yet. The game carried on, quaffle flying. Bludgers dodged. Someone screamed as a bat clipped a helmet. But all eyes in the professor's box turned now to Potter, who was twisting in midair, clearly trying not to be flung to his death by school-issued transport. Cassian looked around. Too many people. Half the pitch was up and screaming, the other half craning their necks. His eyes skimmed the stands, trying to spot a wand out, someone muttering. Anything. But there were robes everywhere. Flags, hats shaped like lions and snakes, floating sweets, someone waving enchanted foam fingers. Nothing useful. Potter's broom kept jerking sideways, like it was trying to buck him off. Just as he was about to shout something, possibly, somebody get Potter down before he eats turf. A sudden flicker caught his eye. Flames burst into life near the staff seats. Cassian turned, squinting through wind and screaming, and saw a spark gutter into full fire right by Snape. Robes licking up like someone had hexed a candle into his arse. He stood, not because he was feeling helpful. Snape could fall into a pit, and he would send a polite note to his family, maybe a fruit basket, but because he saw a Gryffindor student, suddenly ducked out of sight, bushy hair trailing behind her. Bit of a sprint down the rows. Cassian caught only a flash of her scarf and hair as she disappeared under the seats. Snape was flailing now, stomping, trying to smother it with the edge of his cloak, while simultaneously not looking like he cared anyone could see him panic. He hissed something, batted out the rest of the flames with a snarl, and sat back down, his hem singed. Cassian blinked. Potter's broom stopped shaking. Cassian blinked again. Lee Jordan shouted something about the match ending, but he didn't catch the exact words. The stadium was too loud, voices piling on top of each other. He looked up just in time to see Potter spitting out the snitch like it was a hairball into his hand. Gryffindors went feral. Scarves flew, hats launched. Madam Hooch didn't even get the chance to blow her whistle before she was swarmed by half the red and gold section, all screaming. McGonagall looked positively euphoric, hands clasped, smile wide. Cassian made a mental note to never mock Gryffindor tactics in her hearing again, or, at least, not without a 3-exit escape plan. He tracked his eyes towards the staff exit, catching the flutter of dark robes as Snape slipped through, still smoking faintly at the hem. Think he realized who set him on fire? He asked. If he didn't, he is losing his edge. Cassian didn't argue. He watched as Hermione Granger emerged from under the stands, smoothing her skirt and brushing ash from her jumper. The girl didn't look triumphant, just wary. He tucked that away. Later problem. Right now, the match was technically over, and the stadium was turning into a circus. Jordan was still shouting, mostly nonsense at this point, something about Potter's digestive prowess and the record for youngest snitch ingestion. Someone behind Cassian started a chant. It was loud, off-key, and had far too many syllables for a proper cheer. Cassian stood and stretched. "We done here." Bathsheba nodded and rose. "You think anyone will question the broom thing?" Probably not. And he was right. No one talked about it. Most just chalked it up to Harry's inexperience. First time on a broom, nerves, maybe a stomach spell gone wrong. A few muttered something about faulty equipment. Filch was already poking around the broom shed. Probably didn't know Harry's broom was special. But no one asked the obvious question. Why a school-approved broom had suddenly tried to murder its rider in midair. Chapter 72. When Christmas arrived, most of the castle emptied. Trunks rolled, owls flapped, and the corridors went back to their usual winter haunt of drafts and creaking portraits. Cassian stayed. Bathsheba stayed. She always did. Practically welded herself to the place. He was, of course, invited to Yule, and as always, ignored the invitation. He had better plans. Mainly, chaos. December 25th kicked off with Cassian launching the first snowball straight into George Weasley's unsuspecting face. The courtyard was ankle-deep in fresh snow, untouched and glittering. Not for long. "We are under attack!" George shouted, flailing back like he was cursed. Fred appeared immediately, holding a half-formed snowball in each hand. What lunatic fires without warning? Cassian stepped out from behind a column, coat unbuttoned, scarf flapping. "This lunatic," Ron yelped as a second snowball slammed into the side of his head. "Oi, Professor!" "Fight back or perish," Cassian called, already scooping up another handful. "Those are your options." A few of the stragglers had gathered in the courtyard. Harry and a pair of third years, who'd stayed behind because their families lived too far or fought too often. Percy stood at the edge, arms folded like he might get infected if a snowflake touched him. "I will have you know," Percy said loudly, "this is highly undignified." Cassian whipped a snowball at him, missed by an inch. Education comes in many forms, Weasley. Today's lesson is war tactics. A shriek from behind. Bathsheba, bundled in a scarf bigger than her torso, hurling a snowball the size of a quaffle. It missed Fred by a hair and exploded against a pillar. "Bloody hell," Fred said, diving behind a bench. "She has got siege weapons." Percy was horrified, not scandalized, not mildly disappointed, full-on horrified, in the way only Percy Weasley could manage. Back Ramrod's straight nose in the air, like dignity itself had been insulted. Bathsheba babbling, esteemed rune master, decorated scholar, terrifying academic presence, was hurling a snowball the size of a cauldron at Fred Weasley, and laughing. Percy looked betrayed, but Professor babbling et too. She didn't answer. Probably didn't hear him over the roar of impact as her next snowball slammed into a tree and shook the snow from its branches. Fred yelped and hit the ground, shielding himself from heavy artillery. Cassian strolled past Percy without stopping. Oh, she is gone. Fully corrupted. Light a candle for her soul. Percy's mouth opened and closed, failing to form words. Cassian bent, packed a snowball, and lobbed it underarm at George. It bounced off the boy's hip. George spun and grinned like someone had handed him a license to commit war crimes. Harry got hit thrice before he could wrap his head around what was happening. First one smacked him square in the ear. Second caught his ribs. Third, right in the face. By the time he realized he was under an ambush, the boy turned into a machine, spun on his heel, scooped snow with a snarl, and started pelting back like it was survival instinct. George yelped as one nailed his kneecap. Fred dived for cover behind a statue. Ron tripped over his own foot, vanished into a snowdrift, and emerged swearing vengeance. Cassian grinned. "Now this," he said, lobbing another shot over the top of the bench. "This is fun." A snowball whistled past his ear. He didn't flinch, just scooped another with one hand while sipping from a suspiciously warm flask with the other. "You are meant to be the adult," Percy shouted from behind a stone column. Cassian turned, squinted, then chucked a snowball that smacked the column so hard it rattled Percy's glasses. Asterisk, that was mercy. Bathsheba ducked beside him, cheeks pink from cold and murder. She tossed him a fresh snowball like a soldier handing over ammo. He caught it and shot it straight into Fred's path. The boy skidded, slipped, and landed on his arse. A triumphant shout went up from one of the younger students. "We've got a professor on our side." Fred and George regrouped behind a bench, whispering. That was never a good sign. Cassian narrowed his eyes. They are planning something. Bathsheba hit him in the arm. "You are planning something?" He gave her an innocent look. "Am I not allowed to enjoy the subtle art of snowball warfare? You threw one at Percy's head." "I missed." She raised an eyebrow. "Intentionally," he added. There was a moment of quiet, too quiet. The Weasley twins had vanished. Cassian stood, peering over the snowbank. "Don't like that," he muttered. Then the ambush hit. Two twin-shaped blurs burst from behind the pillar, each with a snowball the size of a bludger and less aerodynamic sense than a flying pig. One hit the tree. The other hit Cassian square in the chest. He stumbled, almost dropping on one knee, and wheezed. "Assassinated by children." Bathsheba cackled and pushed him over. He hit the snow with a grunt and a flurry of limbs. She dropped beside him and landed a snowball right in his stomach before rolling away, giggling into her scarf. "Traitor," Cassian coughed. "Survival," she shot back, already remerming, ducking behind a bench and hurling another snowball that clipped George's ear. Cassian rolled over, packed a tight, mean little ball, and stood. "All right, you've had your fun. Now you've made it personal." The Weasleys took one look at his face and bolted. Cassian didn't chase. He aimed. 1, 2. George and Fred both yelped as they got smacked in the backs. The courtyard roared in approval. Ron was crawling out of the snowbank, half covered in white, muttering something about unfairness. Harry was laughing so hard he dropped his own snowball. Cassian stood victorious atop a bench, arm outstretched like a general mid-campaign. Percy stepped out from the shadows. "Professor Rosier, this is chaos!" Cassian pointed a snowball directly at him. "Correct." Another snowball hit Percy in the knee. "Not Cassian's," he turned. Bathsheba looked smug. "Oops, right," Percy said stiffly, brushing snow off his robes. "This is entirely inappropriate." Cassian aimed again. "I don't make the rules." "You are a professor," he threw it. "Direct hit." Percy spun in outrage, slipped, and landed flat on his back. There was a moment of shocked silence. Then Ron howled with laughter. Harry dropped into the snow, wheezing. Fred shouted, "Best Christmas ever!" Bathsheba staggered back against the bench, laughing so hard she couldn't breathe. Cassian offered Percy a hand up. Percy ignored it and marched off in a huff. Cassian dusted his hands. "Right, break is over. Time for strategic retreat." Bathsheba threw a snowball that caught him in the side of the head. "You are terrible at retreats." He blinked snow out of his lashes. "You've gone rogue." She blew him a kiss and vanished behind a snowbank. Cassian muttered something that might have been affectionate or a curse, hard to tell, and trudged toward the castle, brushing snow from his collar. He spotted Hagrid on his way back in, shoulders hunched, dragging not one, not two, but 12 fir trees behind him. Snow clung to the bark, pine needles trailed in his wake. Each tree was the size of a modest tower, and Hagrid was hauling them like laundry. Cassian slowed as he approached, eyebrows raised. Oh, they are bigger than last year's. Planning to replace the walls. Hagrid beamed, red-cheeked and sweating under 3 layers of patched coat. Gru and Mazelf, he said, giving one of the trunks a proud thump. Cassian eyed the tallest. That one could house students, possibly a small village. Good roots, Hagrid said. This one is from just south of the forest. Grew fast, sturdy. Bit temperamental in summer, though. Dropped all its needles when Flitwick tried a trimming charm. Understandable, Cassian muttered. I would shed too if Flitwick tried to tidy me. Hagrid let out a wheezy chuckle and hoisted another tree into position against the castle wall. Need a hand? Cassian asked, already not meaning it. Nah, nearly done, Hagrid grinned. Just gotta get him in the hall now. He sighed, flicked his wand with a muttered Wingardium Leviosa, and trees lifted an inch off the snowy ground. Gotta take advantage of magic. A tree creaked, probably disagreed. Cassian gave it a look. Don't start. He guided the fir through the door, turning sideways so the trunk didn't scrape the frame. Pine needles rained down, trying to mark territory. Hagrid herded the rest behind him, muttering encouragements to the trees like they were oversized pets. The entrance hall smelled of damp boots and sap now. Festive. Inside, the Great Hall was half done. Garlands draped evenly across the arches like some obsessive elf had used a ruler. Cassian was willing to bet his wand that every house elf was clinically obsessive. The 4 house tables were gone, replaced with a single long one stretching from end to end. Not many students stayed for Christmas, so there wasn't much point keeping them separated by scarf colors. Even the professors ate at the same table. Cassian found that novelty wore off around the second time you had to pass gravy to Snape without accidentally tipping it. Hagrid grunted, dragging the last of the fir trees into place. Flitwick was already perched on a stool nearby, holding a glittering box of baubles and muttering charms that made them float up like bubbles. Little spheres of blue, silver, green, bronze, yellow, black, red, and gold drifted toward the branches and settled into place, glowing faintly. Perfect timing. Professor Rosier, Flitwick said without looking down. Care to assist? Cassian shrugged. Sure. Nothing like decorating a tree to remind you how fragile glass baubles are. He raised his wand to float a handful of them toward the lower branches. It wasn't long before other professors trickled in. Well, most of them. Snape was conspicuously absent, and so was Quirrell. Chapter 73. It wasn't long before other professors trickled in. Well, most of them. Snape was conspicuously absent, and so was Quirrell. 2 years back, when Cassian was fresh-faced and hadn't yet figured out how many broom closets hid illicit fire whiskey, he remembered Quirrell, helping with these very decorations. He'd even seen the man elbow-deep in garland, untangling charms alongside the elves or helping Madame Pomfrey with tedious paste creation. This year, though, Quirrell barely left his room. The vampire fiasco in Romania had rattled him good, it seemed, and Cassian couldn't shake the sense the man was trying very hard not to be noticed. McGonagall arrived with lips pursed in a way that said she'd been expecting the banners to hang themselves by now. She flicked her wand, and the house colors overhead rolled smoothly into Hogwarts crests. Sprout was humming to herself off to the side, waving her wand in broad arcs. The trees shimmered, branches stretching fuller, needles looking sharper and greener than they had moments ago. A stray pine cone popped off and rolled across the floor. Cassian caught it under his boot and nudged it toward a corner. Marvelous, Cassian called. Now they will shed even more. Better than them looking half dead by Christmas Eve, Sprout replied mildly. Septima and Aurora came in with Bathshada, the 3 of them laughing at something that probably involved a student and an experiment gone wrong. They joined Cassian by the nearest tree. Aurora's hands were full of gold tinsel that trailed dangerously close to her boots. We are late, blamed Septima. She spotted a 5th year trying to charm Mistletoe into sprouting over the Slytherin common room door. Educational, Cassian said, stepping aside so a floating box of baubles could whiz past. A bit forward, but educational. Bathsheba handed him a smaller box, filled with fragile glass baubles that glimmered faintly in the candlelight. Try not to break these. They are from before your time. He peered inside. Everything is before my time here. He hung the fragile ornament and stepped back slightly, eyeing the tree, then nodded proudly. All right, that one is secure. How many of these bloody things are we putting up? As many as fit, Bathsheba said. Flitwick says symmetry is everything. Aurora stepped up, dropping an armful of tinsel on the bench. You are doing a fine job, Rosier. For someone who clearly never helped decorate anything in his life. Cassian didn't even glance at her. I will have you know I once managed to string lights around a tiny plastic tree with no fatalities. Aurora raised an eyebrow. Plastic. Cassian froze. Right. No plastic here. No cling film, no cheap toys, nothing. He'd been mistaking glossy charms for polymers since he arrived. The only plastic in the castle was probably his Biros. He snapped out of it, forcing a shrug. Muggle thing. Don't worry, it wasn't cursed. Bathsheba grinned faintly, tinsel in her hands. You've a habit of saying strange things when you are distracted. Occupational hazard, Cassian said, historian's brain. We are trained to question why we can't find a single bloody polymer in a civilization built on magic. He placed another bauble carefully on a low branch. For instance, I am now wondering if Yair Ministry ever tried replacing parchment with typewriters. Aurora rolled her eyes. You think too much. Probably, Cassian muttered. Keeps me out of trouble, mostly. Bathsheba moved to his side, looping a strand of gold garland between her fingers before draping it around his neck, like she was crowning a particularly uncooperative Christmas tree. Cassian let out a chuckle, tilting his head as the garland tickled his chin. Oh, good. Festive strangulation. How thoughtful, he said, tugging it loose. She ignored him and kept fussing with the ends, twisting them until they sat in something resembling a bow. Cassian flicked his wand lazily, and a sprig of mistletoe appeared above them, dangling in midair. Aurora groaned from across the tree, rolling her eyes so hard Cassian was half surprised they didn't summon a gale. Septima sighed and turned her back entirely, muttering something about standards and professional decorum. Bathsheba slapped his arm lightly, though her lips curled faintly as she glanced up at the mistletoe. You are impossible, she murmured. Incorrect. I am improbable, Cassian corrected, leaning close to brush his nose against her cheek. Completely different academic category. She shook her head but didn't move away, letting him catch her lips in a quick kiss. A handful of enchanted baubles floated awkwardly nearby, almost as if they too had opinions about staff fraternization. Cassian pulled back with a lopsided grin and plucked the garland from his neck, setting it on the nearest branch. Satisfied? Not even slightly, she replied, reaching for another roll of tinsel. Excellent. That means we are even. Asterisk. Asterisk, asterisk. Cassian was at the long table with Bathsheba to his right. Professors gathered at the far end and students filling out the rest. A handful of stragglers and orphans, plus the Weasleys who were impossible to miss. On Cassian's left sat one of them, Fred or George. He didn't bother guessing which. It wasn't worth being wrong twice. He nudged his plate away, eyeing a suspicious pile of roasted parsnips. So, he said lightly, how long before one of you tries to start a pudding war? The twin smirked. Depends. How throwable do you think it is? Bathsheba pressed her lips together, clearly holding back a laugh as she reached for her glass. Encouraging food wars at dinner now? I am supervising, Cassian said. Besides, I would rather see the pudding go up than watch Percy recite the etiquette for passing the salt. The twin beside Cassian gave him a conspiratorial glance. So you are not seeing family either, Professor? Cassian arched a brow. What gave me away? The fact I am here or the fact I am sane? The boy snorted, nearly choking on a sip of pumpkin juice. Harry glanced up briefly at the exchange. then went back to stabbing his Yorkshire pudding. The food was good. Hogwarts elves never failed to deliver. Snape was eating in silence, as though stabbing a piece of potato was all the communication the table needed. Quirrell sat further down, hands tight on his cutlery. Every so often, his head would twitch like he'd caught a phantom sound, eyes darting to the door. Nothing there. Cassian tracked his nervous little flinches with mild interest. At the head of the table, Dumbledore sat with that same serene smile, eyes bright and too sharp for someone who looked half asleep. He glanced over the hall as though memorizing every plate and face. George leaned in. "You ever hex someone at the table, Professor? Not unless they deserved it." Fred's grin widened. What did they do? Asked too many questions during. Both twins laughed. After the feast, the great hall had emptied. Most of the students had trudged off to their common rooms, leaving behind only a handful of stragglers. Cassian sat in an armchair near the fire. Bathsheba was curled sideways on the sofa, head resting on her hand, watching Harry and Ron fumble through a round of wizard's chess on the floor. The board barked insults every time Ron hesitated. One of the pawns looked ready to leap off and strangle him itself. "Name is sexist," Cassian muttered, eyes flicking over the pieces. George tilted his head from where he lounged on the carpet. "What is sexist, Professor R?" Cassian blinked, looking over at Bathsheba as if silently asking whether the word hadn't made its way to 1990, the magical world, or just these particular kids yet. She didn't answer, her mouth twitched slightly, but she kept her eyes on the chessboard. George was still watching Cassian expectantly. The chessboard made a loud cracking sound as Ron's knight took a pawn. Cassian sighed. Right? Sexist? That is a term used when someone assumes one gender is superior to another, or when they exclude, belittle, or downright erase the other half of humanity in something as mundane as a game. Fred blinked at him. "What's that got to do with chess?" Cassian pointed his fingers at the board on the floor. "Everything? The name Wizard's Chess. As if witches can't bloody play it. Which, if you want a history lesson, isn't just a name. For centuries, in both magical and non-magical societies, women were barred from tournaments, excluded from guilds, or told their delicate constitutions couldn't handle strategy. Yeah, but witches' chesses doesn't sound as cool." Cassian gave him a flat look. "Congratulations. You've just explained centuries of problems." Bathsheba gave him a sidelong glance, faint amusement in her eyes. "You are going to ruin their game?" "Good. It deserves ruining," Cassian said, not missing a beat. "This isn't just about a silly name. Back in the day, plenty of magical households wouldn't even let girls learn the game. Boys played chess, girls learnt embroidery, and hoped their future husbands wouldn't lose the family fortune in 3 moves. Bloody thrilling. That," Fred frowned. "So why is it still called Wizard's Chess?" Cassian spread his hands. "Because people are lazy. Names stick. Nobody questions them. By the time witches were allowed, half the magical world had already decided it wasn't a ladylike pastime." A girl hovering near the board raised her brows. "Exactly," Cassian said, catching her expression. "Imagine being told you can't play a game because someone's great-great-granddad thought women's brains might boil if they planned 2 moves ahead." Harry made a face, tugging his knight forward. "That is stupid." "Brilliant deduction," Cassian muttered. "Welcome to history." Bathsheba laughed, shaking her head. "He is only warming you up, so when I thrash him repeatedly, he won't look so tragic in comparison." Cassian's triumphant smirk faltered mid-formation. He froze, eyes narrowing slightly as his brain caught up to the betrayal. "Et tu, Bathsheba?" he said. "I expected this from the twins, but from you? Treachery." Fred snorted so loudly it startled one of Ron's pawns. "She is got you there, Professor R." Cassian huffed, sinking back into his chair, arms folded. "I am surrounded by snakes, and not even the dignified Slytherin ones. Just the garden variety that bite for sport." Bathsheba didn't even look up. "Stop sulking. If I play, you won't even touch the board before I've swept it clean." "Blasphemy," Cassian muttered. "Absolute slander." He leaned forward and squinted at her. "You know I could beat you with 1 rook tied behind my back." "You couldn't beat me if you used all your pieces in mine," Ron winced. Yeah, she is Ravenclaw. Cassian snorted, cracked his knuckles, and sat down at the board with the air of a man preparing to stage a grand intellectual comeback. Chapter 74. 10 minutes later, Cassian was staring at an empty field of ash and splinters that used to be his army. Bathsheba leaned her chin on her hand. That is 3 for me. Well, Cassian said, flicking a piece of pawn off the board. As I said, women are as great as men, possibly greater, at least in strategy and cruelty. Was that your excuse last time, too? She asked mildly. George grinned from where he'd sprawled on the rug. You are losing, Professor. I am testing her, Cassian said flatly, reassembling his side of the board. Fred snorted. You are handling it by sulking. I am handling it, Cassian said, slamming his knight, by formulating a counteroffensive so elegant it will be sung in taverns. Bathsheba moved her queen. His rook exploded into shards. Cassian stared at the wreckage. Or, she said, voice mild, you will be remembered as the man who lost 6 matches in a row and blamed the board. It wasn't 6 times in a row, it was 7. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Cassian sprinted down the corridor. Bathsheba draped across his arms, held limp. Drop me before anyone sees us, she hissed, swatting at his shoulder. He tightened his grip and ran faster. Number Cass. Nope. I'm the pack mule now. And you are lucky I am not adding sound effects. Her head thumped against his chest as he took a sharp corner, boots sliding slightly on the polished stones. A portrait of a knight glared down at them as they passed. Muttering something about propriety and ladies' honor, Cassian ignored it. You can't keep carrying me around like this, Bathsheba said, voice muffled. They rounded another corner, this one narrower, lined with dusty suits of armor. One clanged as his elbow clipped it. Drop me! She tried again, wriggling. He adjusted his hold. You really think I am giving you the satisfaction of walking the castle looking like you just thrashed me at chess? Bathsheba burst into laughter and smacked his chest. This is about the chess. This is absolutely about the chess. I am staging a strategic retreat. Don't ruin my momentum. You are ridiculous, and you are heavy. She gasped in mock outrage and pinched his side. He flinched, nearly stumbled, then righted himself with a grunt. Fine, fine. You are featherlight and glorious. Happy, very. By now, they were halfway down the main staircase. A pair of second years froze at the sight of them. Cassian with his scarf askew and Bathsheba's hair a mess of curls trailing over his arm. Professor Rosier. One of them started. Quidditch training, Cassian said without slowing. She is the quaffle. They gawked. He barreled past, robes flaring. Bathsheba buried her face in his coat, shoulders shaking. You are going to get sacked. Worth it. He reached her room, didn't even bother with finesse, and dumped her on the bed. She bounced twice, let out a muffled sound of protest, and immediately found herself wrapped in a blanket. Cassian yanked the edges tight around her like he was tucking in a reluctant burrito. Here, delivered. No refunds, he said, dropping onto the mattress beside her with an exaggerated sigh and throwing an arm around her middle. She wrestled an arm free and pinched his cheek, but her heart wasn't in it. You are the worst courier. He hugged her tighter, smirking against her hair. And you are the best girl to Princess Carrie. Bathsheba rolled her eyes. That wasn't a Princess Carrie. Excuse me, did I or did I not haul you through 3 corridors while narrowly missing every wall? If that isn't a Princess Carrie, then Snow White's been lied to. That was closer to a sack of potatoes, she said flatly, trying to shove him off. Cassian grinned, locking his arms tighter. A very well-packaged, premium-tier sack of potatoes. One with excellent hair. Her glare softened slightly, but her hand still gave his shoulder a shove. You are a fool, true. But I am warm, and I've got a solid record of not dropping you down the stairs, which I think counts for something. He shifted, so his chin rested lightly on her shoulder, voice dropping to a murmur. Also, you've got this terrible habit of passing out mid-gloating. I am doing the noble thing here. You wouldn't know noble if it hexed you in the face. Harsh. Here I am, risking my vertebrae to ensure her smugness arrives safely in her chambers. Because I keep beating you. He pulled back to look at her, brow arched. 7 games, Bathsheba. 7. That is not beating. That is war crimes against my dignity. You don't have dignity, Cassian gasped. And now you've stabbed the corpse. Cruel woman. Bathsheba reached for the nearest pillow and tossed it at his head. He caught it lazily and propped it behind him. Do you plan on sleeping here? She asked. Wasn't planning on moving. My legs are still in mourning after the stairs. I am not heavy, Bathsheba slapped his chest with the flat of her hand. Ow, are you suggesting I am weak? Because that is offensive. Historically inaccurate, too. My ancestors lifted entire libraries, probably. She shifted, climbing onto him before he could roll away. Her knees pinned his sides, and her hands braced on his shoulders as she leaned in, hair falling in a soft curtain around his face. Show me how strong you are then, she murmured, lips brushing his in challenge. He smirked up at her. Careful. You say things like that, and I might take it as an invitation. Do it, she said simply and kissed him. The blanket tangled around them as he pressed her down into the mattress. His weight braced on his elbows so he didn't crush her entirely. She hooked her legs around his hips anyway and pulled him closer, like she didn't care if he flattened her. Strong enough for you? He grumbled against her throat, lips ghosting the sensitive skin there. Acceptable. She managed between quick, shallow breaths. Her fingers dug into his hair, tugging just hard enough to make him hiss. You started this. Prove you can finish it. And he did. For the rest of the night, neither of them managed a coherent sentence. They woke up a few hours later to open their gifts. Cassian was still half dead on Bathsheba's bed, and his hair stuck out in about 7 directions. Bathsheba was still tucked against his side, one arm flung across his chest like she'd claimed him in her sleep. He stared down at her hair, a messy halo of dark curls, and sighed, loudly, the sort of sigh meant to wake someone and earn sympathy. No reaction. Up, he called, prodding her shoulder, a faint grumble. He turned and caught sight of the little pine in the corner of her room. Well, little for Hogwarts standards, and the neat row of boxes under it. They've dumped my presents in your room, Cassian muttered, dragging a hand down his face. No privacy in this bloody castle. None. Bathsheba didn't even lift her head from his chest. They are just sending gifts, not spying on us. That is exactly what they want you to think. He swung his legs over the edge of the bed, rubbing at his neck. First, it is gifts. Next thing you know, a portrait is narrating our every move to Dumbledore over tea. She shrugged. That is actually possible. Right. Let's see which relative's passive aggression made it through customs this year. Cassian checked the labels on a few parcels from his family, then tossed them into his enchanted bag without hesitation. The bag was already half full with years' worth of unopened Rosier gifts. Some still sat in their original boxes, as if waiting for him to care. He didn't. He cracked open a box from Professor Flitwick and blinked down at a delicate charm, a tiny bronze bell inscribed with runes. Supposed to ward off ill fortune, Bathsheba murmured. He set the bell aside carefully and ripped into the next one. A thick woolen scarf from Professor Sprout, all earthy greens and browns. A little card fluttered out. For long walks in cold corridors. Don't let your neck catch a chill. Sweet, Cassian said. He looped it around his neck and let it hang. Makes me look like I am about to start a hedge witch commune. He snorted, tossing the wrapping aside. A neat stack of gifts from students sat at the edge of the bed. One was clearly from Tonks. She started interning in the ministry. Still had time to send him ridiculous things. He pried open the paper to find a pair of violently clashing socks. One lime green, one hot pink, both enchanted to flash when he walked. Glamorous, he said, holding them up for Bathsheba to inspect. They suit you, she said, entirely serious. Everything suits me. It is a curse. He balled them up and chucked them at the pile. The Weasley twins' offering was next. Cassian raised an eyebrow at the box labeled Professor Er's Emergency Kit. Inside sat a small flask, a joke wand that sprouted daisies on command, and a bar of Honeyduke's chocolate. Cassian barked a laugh and held up the flask. They know me too well. Terrifying. Bathsheba took a sip of her drink. Try not to encourage them. I will encourage them right into their first attentions of the year. He tugged open another package, this one neatly tied in blue ribbon. Hermione Granger's handwriting decorated the tag. Inside was a small leather-bound notebook and a carefully inked note for recording anything interesting over the holiday. Happy Christmas. Cassian thumbed through the blank pages, lips twitching faintly. All right, bright kid. Might live long enough to hate her first ministry job. Bathsheba reached over to pluck the notebook from his hands, flipping it open. She writes like she is 40. That is what happens when you peak at 11. From Bathsheba herself came a long, narrow box wrapped in muted gold paper. Cassian opened it carefully and found a rune-etched pen resting inside, sleek black with silver runes curling along the barrel. It felt unnaturally warm in his hand. He glanced at her, one brow arched. Bribing the staff again, are we? Call it professional encouragement, she said, not looking up from her pile. Cassian gave the pen a testing flick. The runes glimmered faintly, then settled. It is stunning! I will use it to grade Slytherin essays, exclusively. Bathsheba chuckled at that. They checked Bathsheba's gifts next, the pile considerably larger and far more impressive than his sad little collection. Runes professors, apparently, had an international fan club. First came a soft, dove-gray jumper, hand-knit, with a faint shimmer in the wool that suggested it was charmed against spills. She ran her fingers over the weave, with the sort of reverence Cassian reserved for rare manuscripts. Let me guess, he said, sipping from a mug she shoved at him earlier. Your mother, who is determined to outknit every witch from here to Stockholm. Grandmother, Bathsheba corrected, holding it up to the light. She still thinks I live in a frozen tower. You do live in a frozen tower, Cassian pointed out. But go on. The next box revealed an assortment of rune, etched quills so fine, they made his own battered set look like they belonged in a primary school pencil case. Bathsheba hummed, testing the balance of one against her palm. Imported from Frankfurt, she murmured, reading the little card. Hild again, Urson says hi. Cassian just hummed as if he'd expected it. Wait, who is Ierson again? Bathsheba sighed. The other German scholar, the one who reached Hilda first, Hilda's best friend. She went back to opening gifts. He leaned back on his elbows, watching as she unwrapped a slim black case and found a pendant stitched with fine golden thread. That from an admirer or a colleague. Bathsheba didn't answer straight away. She traced the embroidery with her thumb. Colleague? The kind of colleague who sends perfectly tailored leather? The kind of colleague who owes me 3 favors and is trying to bribe me out of collecting. Better, Cassian grinned. She kissed him. Her lips curved. Thank you, she murmured. You are welcome. I will bill you for the hours. Bathsheba laughed quietly and tucked the pendant under her shirt. Chapter 75. By the time night fell, Cassian was back in the corridors, patrolling, always patrolling, and Hogwarts loved to creak at night. He turned into the south wing and spotted a familiar sash rounding the corner. Professor Rosier, came a too-chipper voice. Miss Clearwater, nothing unusual on the 3rd floor. Peeves tried to rearrange the armors again, but per Mr. Weasley convinced him to duel a staircase instead. Cassian blinked. What did the staircase do? 1, sir, she said, very serious. He is now stuck on the 3rd landing arguing with the portraits. He nodded. Acceptable outcome. Percy jogged up a second later, slightly out of breath. We checked all the east towers. One of the Hufflepuff second years was crying behind a tapestry about missing pudding. But other than that, nothing. Give the child a biscuit and tell them life only gets worse, Cassian said flatly. Penelope blinked. Percy smothered a scoff. Keep circling. Send word if Peeves starts rhyming in Latin, he added. Yes, Professor, they chorused, turning to vanish down the next corridor with a flurry of robes and over-polished shoes. Nothing happened for the next hour or so. Cassian almost thought it might be a quiet night, but the night didn't disappoint. The sound of a muffled giggle reached him near the east stairwell. He stopped, sighed, and pivoted toward the nearest broom closet. Knocked hard. Out. Now, no need to get dressed in a panic. I am counting to 5. A frantic whisper. A thud. Then the door creaked open. Eliza Windmill and Lenny Pendlebrook stepped out, suspiciously composed for 27th-year Ravenclaws who clearly thought the word closet meant hotel suite. Cassian didn't blink. Go to your rooms. You are lucky I am not assigning a scroll on magical hygiene. Next time, I will dock points. Hear me? Lenny gave him a rueful smile. Good evening, Professor R. Don't flirt with me when you still smell like bad decisions, he said dryly, waving them away. Off you go. They fled. Dignity somewhat intact Eliza, nearly tripping over her own shoe? He turned back into the corridor, walking past the staircases when a sharp, dry cough echoed behind him. Cassian paused, slowly turned. Argus Filch stood there, scowling like someone had pissed in his mop bucket. Argus, Cassian greeted, nodding politely. Filch just grunted. Can't believe they gave you a badge. Technically, I have 2. One for teaching and one for charm. Cassian gave him a faint smile. Filch glared at him, like he might combust from the sheer force of disapproval. Then, with a final sniff of disdain, he turned and shuffled off, muttering something about rosiers and their damn smirks. Cassian watched him go, hands in his pockets. Fair enough, really. When he'd been a student, he paid an older student once to hex Filch's shoelaces to scream every time he stepped near a ward. The man hadn't slept a full night for a week. He had the habit of placing his shoes next to wards to go to sleep. He earned that scowl. Heading toward the charms corridor, he slowed near a darkened classroom. Something felt off. Then, a hiss of laughter, a muttered curse. Cassian moved. 3 Slytherins jumped like they'd been cursed. Teddy Taylor, Dorian Blackwell, and Terrence Higgs were crouched near the front desk with a scattering of enchanted items between them. Exploding ink pots, dancing quills, and what looked suspiciously like a hovering wig that periodically slapped itself against the chalkboard. Gentlemen, Cassian said flatly, busy evening. Dorian tried to palm the ink pot. Just studying, Professor. Teddy chimed in, reinforcing transfiguration theory with visual aids. And sabotage, Cassian said. He stepped forward, picking up one of the quills as it attempted to draw a mustache on his robes. Planning to prank the first years again? Terrence offered a lazy smile. Just some harmless fun, sir. Cassian flicked his wand. The wig tried to slap him. It froze midair, then crumpled like a dying moth. 15 points from each of you, he said, and another 10 from Taylor for smiling like a cartoon villain while holding contraband. Teddy scowled. Dorian swore under his breath. You can collect your things and report to Professor Snape in the morning, Cassian added. Tell him I said hello, and we should catch up one day. Haig's smirk twitched. Will do. They slunk out like wet cats. Cassian glanced around the room one last time, then stepped into the corridor. The night rolled on. He turned into a long stretch of hallway lined with arched windows. The faint moonlight left the stone floor slick and pale. Halfway down, he slowed, squinting at the faint shimmer of something on the air. 5 steps back down the hall, it hit him. Why had he turned? Cassian stopped, turning it over in his head. He was about to check that corridor. Nothing had pulled him back. No noise, no odd smell, no sudden summons from Dumbledore. And yet, he pivoted like a marionette on a snapped string. All right, that is bollocks, he muttered under his breath. His heart thudded, matching the sense of something wrong in his mind. He knew what compulsion magic felt like. This was subtle, but not subtle enough. Whatever it was, it had teeth. He rubbed his temple with his free hand. Brilliant. Either the castle is cursed again, or I finally lost it. This time, he planted his feet squarely before the threshold. Right, your move. Then he lunged forward. Fast. His boots clapped against the stone. 1, 2, 3. By the 4th, it hit. His stomach lurched. The world tipped sideways. It was like someone grabbed his chest and yanked, and he spun. His feet turned him, dragging him back the way he came. "Bloody hell!" he snapped, stumbling to catch his balance. There, that wasn't right. He backed up a step, eyes narrowing at the stretch of stone and shadow. "All right, let's see what you are." He tried a revealing charm. His magic hummed against the corridor, but nothing bloomed in the air. Not a standard ward. "I really don't want to use this," Cassian muttered, raising his wand, trying to push down the memories wanting to invade his mind. Apertus oculus. The words tasted sour in his mouth. This particular variant came with memories he would rather leave rotting in the back of his skull. He could still see the old wizard from that vision, crouched in some damp, echoing chamber, muttering the incantation under his breath. At first, the cave had seemed empty. Safe? Then the illusion cracked. Something moved. Not one thing, but dozens. Creatures with too many eyes and limbs unfolding like broken furniture. Cassian's fingers tightened on the wand. The scary part wasn't that the creatures had mauled him. It was that before the spell they'd been harmless. Invisible, yes, but entirely passive. The act of seeing had made them aware, and awareness had teeth. "All right," he whispered under his breath. "If something jumps me, I am blaming Dumbledore and my will." The hall ahead was quiet, shadows stretching long under the pale wash of moonlight. He kept his wand raised, though he had to stop himself from gripping it like a sword. He drew the tip of his wand in a sharp spiral, breath hissing out. Apertus oculus! The air in front of him shuddered like he ripped a curtain sideways. Magic flared, sharp and strange, and the corridor rippled. For a breath, everything was still. Then it peeled back. One layer at a time, Cassian froze. The corridor wasn't empty, not by a long shot. Thin ropes of magic crisscrossed the floor, faint as cobwebs caught in weak light. A tangled snare of runes glimmered against the flagstones, twisting and curling like snakes trying to swallow their own tails. The ward sat quiet and cold, like it was waiting for someone stupid enough to step in. He squatted, head tilted, tracing the lines with his eyes. "Oh, you are pretty," he murmured, "and very much in my way." It wasn't old, not in the sense of dusty ancient magic buried under centuries of headmasters' egos, but it was clever. Whoever set this up knew their craft. Cassian moved carefully around the edges. A confunding ward, he realized. That explained the force turns, the way his feet had moved without asking. A charm layered over the net to muddle anyone approaching it. Clever and targeted. Most of the staff wouldn't even notice. They would feel the pull and wander off, convinced they were heading the right way. Probably only a handful of people were keyed to walk straight through without feeling a tug, woven in individual signatures. Threads so faint, they barely sparked when he brushed them with magic. He tried to follow the lines further, to see where the signatures hooked into the net, but they bled into the tangle and vanished. Either the runes were designed to collapse the pattern when probed, or they simply didn't care to be understood. That alone was unusual. Most ward makers like to show off, leave a bit of flair in the structure, so anyone who recognized it knew exactly whose work it was. Not this one. Clearly Dumbledore's handiwork. The ward practically hummed with that brand of subtle overcomplication the man loved so much. The why could wait. The only thing that mattered now was seeing what was worth this much subtlety. He traced the knotted runes and threads of magic holding the net in place. Once you spotted them, the ward wasn't too tricky. A few strands thicker than the rest, anchor points. He tapped the first with his wand, felt it give slightly, then skimmed for the second and third. The network softened like a spider web touched by rain. He stepped forward, weaving carefully between the glowing lines. The confunding charm tugged faintly at his senses again. But now that he found the tether points, it was like pushing through a thin veil. The ward curled back on itself with a soft ripple, letting him slip through without so much as a flicker. "All right, old man," he muttered, stepping clear of the ward's edge. "What have you buried in here this time?" The corridor beyond was unremarkable. Stone walls, dust curling along the skirting boards, he approached tiptoeing. The handle turned easily, no further charms. Either Dumbledore had stopped at one ward, unlikely, or he wanted whoever got this far to walk in. Cassian eased the door open. empty classroom. No desks, no chairs, no chalk dust hanging in the air. Just a single object in the center of the room. It was tall, faintly rectangular, and leaned against the far wall as if someone had dragged it in, dumped it there, and promptly lost interest. Cassian shut the door behind him and crossed the floor. Up close, the thing was obvious. A mirror. A cursed wardrobe for the soul, he muttered. Set to reflect an empty classroom, definitely not ominous. He crouched, peering at the edge where the mirror met the floor. He didn't detect any telltale glow or hum of active enchantments like the confunding ward outside. Whatever it wasn't shouting danger, which somehow felt worse. Cassian straightened, fingers brushing the edge of the thing. His reflection wasn't something he usually cared about. Looked at it every morning, cursed his hair carried on. But this wasn't just glass. Nothing Dumbledore locked behind a ward ever was. He stepped in front of it, closer. At the mirror's arch, something shimmered faintly in the low light. A string of jagged letters etched along the frame. Cassian squinted. Erised stra eru oit ubi cafru oit on wosi. He stared, then said flatly, "What in the name of all enchanted bollocks is that supposed to mean?" He leaned in like that might help. It didn't. The letters were still gibberish. Is that a spell? A curse? A particularly bad attempt at Welsh? The more he stared, the less sense it made. He tilted his head, frowning at the scrawl. His own reflection frowned back. Then it clicked. Of course it looked like nonsense. He was reading it straight on, not through the mirror. Bloody obvious, really. It wasn't encrypted, it was just backwards. He had to read it as a reflection. Naturally, text for a mirror, hidden in plain sight. He huffed and read it the other way. "I show not your face, but your heart's desire." Cassian stepped back. "Sure. Infiltrate my mind and show me what my ID thinks." He snapped his gaze forward as he caught something. Cassian froze, 2 steps back. In the glass, he wasn't alone. Chapter 76. In the glass. He wasn't alone. Himself, yes, but not the same man. This Cassian stood straighter, robes sharper. The details behind him were what stopped Cassian's breath. Rows of books, stretched to the ceiling in the reflection. Ancient tomes, scrolls, and artifacts that shouldn't even exist in this century. There was no Hogwarts classroom in sight, just a vast hall glowing softly under enchanted lanterns. And Bathsheba stood at his shoulder, smiling faintly, her fingers brushing his. The Cassian in the glass looked content. Settled. The real Cassian blinked. "Well," he said softly, "that is not creepy at all." He took a step closer, studying the frame. Gold leaf curled around the edges in elaborate swirls, runes stamped into the metal in a language he didn't recognize. Futhark? Number older? The kind of script that made historians gnash their teeth because 3 glyphs could mean either prosperity or death by weasel. Nice design, subtle existential threat. His fingers itched for parchment, for a quick sketch of the glyphs, but he didn't move to touch the glass. He wasn't stupid. He crouched slightly, tilting his head. All right. Is it really desire? Ambition? Inner sociopathy? The Cassian in the mirror raised his head slightly, with a teasing smile and a wink, standing there mockingly, as if he knew he'd been spotted and didn't care. "This has got to be one of Dumbledore's pet projects," he muttered. "No one else dumps a soul trap in a classroom and goes about their business." The Cassian in the mirror stepped back slightly, hands sliding into his robes. Bathsheba leaned against him in the reflection. "Subtle," Cassian said. "Show me what I could have if I weren't busy being suspicious every 5 minutes." The Cassian in the mirror didn't react. "Fine. Just don't gloat." He rubbed the back of his neck. "Right. Let's not go touching it, and I'm not telling Bathsheba. She will probably admonish about walking into warded places." As he was about to leave, footsteps echoed faintly outside the classroom door. Cassian froze mid-step. "Shit," he muttered, scanning the room. There was nothing to hide behind. No cupboards, no friendly tapestries, just a few patches of shadow and the cursed mirror giving him its best. "I know what you want. Look, no time to get clever." He crouched in the corner like a common thief and muttered disillusionment charm. The spell rippled over his skin, his body fading into the stones. Half working at best. No one passing that ward is going to be fooled by this shoddy bit of invisibility, he thought grimly. The charm was temperamental at the best of times, and Cassian wasn't exactly an aura-level sneak. But still, he forced himself to settle. His brain didn't seem keen on risking a run. Calm down, he told himself. I am not a student hiding fire whiskey. I am a bloody professor. If it is a staff patrol, I will bluff. If it is Filch, he will scuttle off muttering. If it is Dumbledore, he stopped that thought before it spiraled. The footsteps were light. A student, an elf, number. Elves moved like whispers. You never heard them coming unless they wanted you to. He squinted, mind running through possibilities. When the door handle clicked, Cassian's breath caught. The door was open slightly then, and then nothing. The door shut again with a faint click. Cassian tilted his head, trying to listen past the pounding in his ears. Faint breathing, barely there, the barest scuff of a shoe on stone. Someone was in here. All right, he murmured under his breath, wand inching higher. Either a ghost that cannot be seen or Hogwarts has invented stealthier children. No, not a ghost. Ghosts don't breathe. Raising his wand, Cassian mouthed a silent, Apertus Oculus. But nothing happened. That alone gave him pause. This charm could tear down glamours, dissolve invisibility, strip disillusionment charms. There, if anything was lurking in this room, he should see it. Then, the air ahead rippled, faint as a mirage, and a boy stepped out of thin air. Cassian stiffened. Potter. The skinny first year stood awkwardly in the center of the room, hair sticking up even worse than usual. He looked over his shoulder nervously, clutching something in his hand. A silvery cloak fluttered at his side. Cassian's mouth went dry. Invisibility cloak, he thought to himself. Bloody hell. Potter didn't see him. Didn't even pause. The boy stepped towards the mirror. Cassian gritted his teeth. If Potter caught even a hint of him crouched, he might just die of sheer embarrassment on the spot. Harry, oblivious to the man flattened into the corner, crept toward the mirror. Cassian couldn't see what Potter was seeing, only the slight tremor in the boy's shoulders, the way his knuckles whitened around the cloak. Whatever it was, it hit him square, and then the boy's shoulders shook. Ah, crying. Cassian let his head fall lightly against the stone behind him. Brilliant. Now he was spying on a crying child. He would have to add that to his running list of moral failings. Right under threatened to hex Percy Weasley over Christmas pudding. Harry stood frozen for a few moments more before bolting. The boy spun on his heel and ran. Cassian stayed still, breathing through his nose. Waited. Counted to 10. 20. Nothing. Finally, he let out a long, quiet breath and slumped onto the cold stone floor properly. His knees cracked in protest. Sweet donkey that beds a dragon, he muttered under his breath. What in the name of cursed chamber pots was that? Cassian got up, brushing dust off his trousers, and edged closer again. The Cassian in the glass hadn't budged, still standing in that impossibly grand library, still flanked by stacks of priceless magical texts and Bathsheba at his side. The bastard even looked like he slept well and owned pressed shirts. Enough. I'm done with you, Cassian whispered. As he stared, a thought itched at the back of his skull. Was this what Harry saw? Family? Something lost. Cassian wasn't exactly a master of child psychology, but he wasn't thick either. The kid's parents had been taken out by Voldemort. If this thing was showing desire, well, the poor sod probably saw them alive and well, smiling back. Cassian rubbed at his face with both hands, groaning. He didn't have the energy for an ethical crisis at. He glanced at the window, whatever ungodly hour this was. Right, he whispered, backing toward the door. I am not touching you. I am not talking about you. Bye-bye. Just as his fingers brushed the door handle, he heard footsteps again. Not again. Damn it. He darted back into the corner, disillusionment charm, crouched again. The door creaked open. 2 figures this time. Ron Weasley tumbled in first, muttering under his breath about cold floors and bossy friends. Harry followed, invisibility cloak draped haphazardly over one arm. You sure they are here? Ron whispered, peering around like the room might bite. Yes, Harry hissed. Saw it earlier. Just be quiet, all right? Cassian pressed himself harder against the wall. This is becoming a bloody trend. The two boys stepped closer to the mirror. Ron stopped dead in his tracks. Blimey, he breathed. That thing is massive. Harry didn't answer. He was staring again, eyes wide. Whatever he saw this time, it seemed to hit just as hard as before. Ron tilted his head, squinting. What are you looking at? All I see is us. Don't you see them? Harry whispered, eyes darting back and forth between Ron and the mirror. I can't see anything. Ron looked at mirror, then his friend, wondering if he had gone mad. Looking it properly. Go on, stand where I am. Harry stepped aside reluctantly, scuffing his heel on the cold stone floor. The moment Ron moved in front of the mirror, Harry's view of his family vanished entirely, replaced with Ron in his too short paisley pajamas. Ron, on the other hand, was stock still, staring at his reflection like he'd been petrified. Look at me, Ron breathed. Can you see my family standing around you? Harry asked, almost a whisper, but packed with hope. Number? Ron said slowly, almost dazed. I am alone, but I am different. I look older. I am head boy. Harry blinked. What? I am look. I am wearing the badge like Bill used to. And I am holding the house cup and the Quidditch cup. I am Quidditch captain too. Cassian clenched his jaw. He could almost hear Dumbledore's voice in his head. All airy wisdom and lemon drops. Oh, they will be fine, Professor Rosier. Nothing dangerous in Hogwarts at all. Do you think this mirror shows the future? Ron asked breathlessly, tearing his eyes away from his reflection for the first time to look at Harry. How can it? All my family are dead. Let me have another look. Harry stepped forward eagerly. You had it to yourself all night, Ron protested, blocking him. Give me a bit more time. You are only holding the Quidditch cup. What is interesting about that? I want to see my parents. Don't push me. Cassian pinched the bridge of his nose, very tempted to drop the charm and march them straight to McGonagall. He didn't, though, partly because he didn't fancy explaining to the deputy head how he ended up lurking in the corner of a locked classroom, and partly because watching them squabble was morbidly fascinating. Don't push me, Ron snapped, stepping closer to the glass. You are being selfish, Harry hissed, shoving at his friend's shoulder. You had all night, Ron shot back. Yeah, and you've had ages now. Move over. The pair of them were shoving now, Harry trying to wriggle in front while Ron held his ground. Oh, for Merlin's sake, Cassian muttered under his breath. Well, finally, they heard something outside. A faint shuffle, the sort of sound that made students freeze mid-argument and remember they weren't supposed to lurk in the dead of the night. Both boys stopped shoving each other. Heads snapped to the door. Harry grabbed Ron's sleeve, yanking him back. Quick, he hissed. The two of them ducked under the cloak in a tangle of elbows and feet, nearly tripping over each other as they bolted for the door. It swung shut behind them, their muffled footsteps vanishing down the hall. Cassian stayed crouched for another breath, just to be sure they were gone. His knees were killing him. He sighed through his nose, rubbing a hand down his face. Then he pushed off the wall. That cloak is insane, he muttered under his breath. I want one. He slipped out into the corridor, shutting the door quietly behind him. As he passed through the confounding ward, something itched at the back of his skull. How the hell did Potter get through this? He murmured. The corridor, unsurprisingly, didn't offer a reply. Was he keyed into the ward? No tug, no turn, just straight through. There was also Weasley. The boy had followed Harry in without issue. Probably hadn't even noticed the magic brushing against him. Cassian pictured Potter dragging Weasley along by the sleeve, all righteous Gryffindor stubbornness. Or maybe the ward didn't bother with students at all. Kept staff out. Let the kids run riot. A more daring idea slipped through his thoughts. Cloak. Could it even stop wards from seeing whoever was under it? Cassian glanced back down the hallway he came from, brow furrowing. The idea made his teeth itch. If that thing really did let Potter stroll straight through a ward designed to bat away staff, he was going to start questioning the entire foundation of Hogwarts security. Not that he hadn't already. Can it really be? He muttered to no one in particular. So either the kid is keyed into Dumbledore's little web of protection spells, or that bit of silk's worth more than every Gringotts vault combined. He didn't like the second possibility. If that cloak was as rare as it looked, Potter probably didn't even know what he was dragging around like a discarded scarf. Cassian had read about them, of course. Invisibility cloaks proper, not the half-arsed disillusionment charms they taught Aurors. True ones were rarer than phoenix feathers, the old ones even more so. And rumor had it the ancient ones weren't just good at hiding you from eyes. They could make you slip right past death. Chapter 77. Marius Vale turned the envelope over twice. It was thick cream parchment. The wax was indigo, stamped with a phoenix that looked like it might rise right off the flap if he stared too long. No mistaking the handwriting. No mistaking the sender. Albus Dumbledore had written to him personally. Vale sat heavily at the little desk in his rented flat. Boots kicked off near the hearth. Coat half slipped from his shoulders. The room smelled faintly of fire, whiskey, and spell oil. He'd been back from a short contract with the DML only a week, and he'd half hoped for a stretch of quiet before the next bloody summons. Apparently not. He broke the wax. The parchment unfolded with a creak. He read with a heavy sigh. My dear Marius, it has been many years since I last had the pleasure of seeing your handwriting across an essay, or your wand, raised in the old dueling chamber. I hope this letter finds you in good health, and that the years since you left these halls have been neither unkind nor uneventful. More than one colleague has brought me word of your career, your diligence in the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, your steady hand in field work where others faltered, your unflagging interest in the finer intricacies of counterhexes. None of this surprised me. Even as a student, you had an eye for the mechanisms of a curse and a patience that outlasted frustration. I am glad to know that those qualities have served you well. I imagine you have had triumphs, and perhaps some wounds, in your years since Hogwarts. Such is the fate of those who take seriously the defense of others. I trust that you have allowed yourself moments of rest between assignments, though I know too well how men of your dedication are apt to neglect their own ease. I should like to hear of your travels, and of the roads that brought you from those first classroom wards to the wide field of duty. You would do me a kindness in writing back, not merely to accept or refuse the offer that follows, but to tell an old teacher how his student has fared beyond the castle stones. Now to the matter at hand. We have need of a teacher whose understanding of counter curses exceeds fashion, and whose patience outlasts even these ancient walls. I would ask you to accept the post of defense against the dark arts professor for the coming year. Officially, you will instruct our students in the principles and practice of defensive magic. Unofficially, I would also entrust you with a second task: to observe a certain anomaly surrounding the post itself. It has troubled us for years, and though you are not asked to resolve it, I would value your eyes upon it. You are not to attempt any unbinding alone. Logs must be kept. Student safety held paramount. I do not demand a victory. I request clarity. Should you accept, you would be both professor and witness, and in that witness perhaps lies the chance to name what others have only whispered. With warm regards and fond remembrance of the boy who once argued footnotes with me past midnight. P.S. Deference to Madam Pince in all matters of documentary access is non-negotiable. Albus P.W.B. Dumbledore. Vale sighed again slowly, tapping the parchment against his knee. Defense against the dark arts, the cursed post. Everyone knew the stories, professors lasting barely a year, some leaving mad, some not leaving at all. The curse was whispered in Auror barracks, muttered over late pints, but never officially acknowledged. And now the headmaster wanted him to walk into it. He leaned back, chair groaning. He set the letter on the desk and reached for the half-empty glass. The whiskey burned down his throat. Defense, Professor! Bloody marvelous. Patience outlasting castle stones. Observe a long-standing anomaly. Do not act alone. Vale rubbed at his temple, then pulled quill and parchment closer. If he was going to accept, and he suspected he already had the moment he cracked that wax, then he would do it on his own terms. He dipped the quill, ink catching in the lamplight. Dear Headmaster, I'll keep logs. Defer to Pince Merlin, help us, and keep the children alive, which is more than I can say for most field assignments. You asked not for victory, but for clarity. Clarity I can try to give, but if you've set me against something that has been chewing through even you for decades, you'd better be ready for the mess that follows. M. Vale he sanded the page, folded it, and sealed it with a drop of red wax. The owl was already tapping at the sill, clever eyes gleaming. Vale tied the letter to its leg and watched it vanish into the night. Asterisk, 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 Marius Vale landed just outside Hogsmeade Station with a thump that rattled his teeth. He never did apparition gracefully. His landing technique had been described once by an unimpressed Auror as a man falling sideways out of a wardrobe. True to form, he stumbled, muttered a curse, then righted himself. Dusting his coat, he set off toward the castle with his battered trunk levitating behind him. The trunk rattled occasionally, not from dangerous artifacts, but from a stash of licorice wands he'd bought on impulse in Diagon Alley. Vale had a habit of chewing them when thinking, which made him look like a surly schoolboy rather than an accomplished curse-breaker. He paused as he reached the gates and muttered, "Well, here is hoping the walls don't spit me out by Christmas." Marius saw Flitwick and McGonagall already inside as he stepped into the office, and despite the years he couldn't help slouching like a boy caught sneaking out of bed. "Hi," he said, a bit too casual, then coughed, straightened. Good evening." Dumbledore waved him forward, eyes bright as he poured tea. Vale sat down, trying not to feel 12 again. "Professor Vale," Dumbledore said warmly, "welcome back to Hogwarts." "Still feels strange hearing that," Vale muttered. He glanced at the shelves, the whirring instruments, the phoenix preening in the corner, and still smells the same. Tea leaves and chaos. Dumbledore's smile deepened. Some things do not change. Now, expectations. Your first duty is teaching defense. Everything else second. Any irregularities with the post are to be logged, not engaged. If you wish to attempt a ritual, it must be reviewed by Professor Flitwick. Any matter involving the school's structure requires Professor McGonagall's approval." Vale nodded, half smiling. "So I am not allowed to blow up a corridor without permission. Good to know." Flitwick let out a laugh, voice piping. "A sensible policy. It is amazing how many young professors forget to ask before rearranging the floor plan." Vale chuckled. "Don't worry, Professor. I am far too lazy to move furniture by accident." McGonagall's lips twitched, almost a laugh. Dumbledore lifted his cup. "Confidence and caution both, Mr. Vale. Hold to those, and you may last longer than most." Vale clinked his cup back, licorice stick still wedged in his teeth. "I'll settle for making it to spring term without setting off the ceiling." Dumbledore set his cup down with a soft clink. "One more thing, Professor Vale. Let us keep this matter between ourselves and the few gathered here. The history of magic professor, Rosier, has a particular curiosity for what does not belong to him. He is sharp, too sharp for his own good, and prone to looking where he shouldn't. With your expertise outranking his in these matters, I do not doubt you could evade him. Or better yet, I would prefer you not to interact overmuch. It would be simpler." Flitwick gave a cheerful chuckle. "Sharp, yes, and magnetized to trouble. He asks more questions than even I can answer, and that is saying something." McGonagall let out a long sigh. "If curiosity were a disciplinary offense, we'd be taking statements twice a week." Vale arched a brow, but kept quiet, chewing the end of his licorice wand thoughtfully. If they were warning him this pointedly on his first night back, the man must be a complication worth noting. He would keep an eye for that one. Chapter 78. Cassian didn't bother going back to the mirror. For one, he wasn't on patrol for the next few nights. For another, he would far rather spend that time tangled in Bathsheba's sheets than staring at some enchanted glass, whispering about his supposed desires. Why waste a second watching a reflection of her when the real thing was warm in his arms, hair a mess against his chest, skin carrying the faint scent of ink and sleep. He didn't need to watch a reflection of her smiling at him in some idealized library. They were already finding ancient texts together. They were already piecing through runes and arguing over syntax in her cramped office. Going back to that mirror would have been like watching smut, while his wife sat in the next room with her jumper sliding off her shoulder, waiting for him with tea and warm hands. Cheap. A bit pathetic, really. Besides, he had better ways to fill his time. Bathsheba had brought him a bundle of scrolls from her last library trip, runic fragments copied out in a spidery hand, each one promising either thrilling discovery or an inevitable headache. They spent hours cross-legged on her bed, parchment spread like a battlefield, arguing over glyph placements and translation quirks until their voices turned hoarse. It was bliss. No wards, no trolls, no flaming brooms or dodgy mirrors, just them, ancient text, and the occasional heated debate about whether a particular rune meant bind or consume. The Christmas break didn't last. Soon enough, trunks clattered up staircases again. Owls swooped through the rafters with last-minute sweets orders, and Hogwarts filled back up with chattering children in scarves too long for their own good. Cassian watched them shuffle past on the first morning of the term, perched on the edge of the staff table, mug of coffee in hand. "Remind me," he muttered to Bathsheba, "why we let them back in. Because the alternative is an empty school with you, wandering the halls like a haunted librarian," she murmured, not looking up from the parchment she was annotating. "One can only dream." Minerva swept in, her tartan shawl flaring behind her, and barked something at a group of third years who were apparently debating whether a dung bomb would work underwater. Cassian watched them scatter. He sipped his coffee and hummed. "January resolutions, Rosier?" Aurora asked. Same as last year. Keep all students alive, preferably unsinged. And confiscate any experimental charms involving pineapple. You are still bitter about the fruit incident." Bathsheba smiled innocently. "I am bitter about the pineapple singing an aria outside my quarters for 3 hours straight." She laughed faintly and returned to her parchment. He slowly turned his head to her, his nose pressed against her temple. "I know it was you." She turned without flinching, now nose to nose with him. "You cannot prove anything." Cassian's eyes narrowed. In the way a man does when he knows he has been played and isn't sure whether to admire it or plot immediate revenge. "Well," he said finally, straightening up and brushing imaginary dust from his sleeve, "classes start soon. I suppose you can hide behind your syllabus," she smirked, turning back to her scroll. "I don't need to hide. You are just bitter." He gestured vaguely toward her. "Bitter? Me? No. I am already drafting your medal for most smug woman in Scotland." Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk students shuffled between lessons, scarves trailing, boots squeaking against whetstone from the winter melt. The chatter echoed through the corridors as if the Christmas break had never happened. In one of the fifth-year lessons, Cassian was at the front of the classroom, wand in one hand, and a piece of chalk dangling lazily from the other. The board behind him already had memory modification. First Principles scrawled across it in a looping script. "Well," Cassian began, writing Nimone Radford under the title. History credits Nimone Radford as the witch who first developed memory-modifying charms. Clever, gifted, and probably entirely insufferable at dinner parties. She also became the first Ministry Obliviator because, surprise, surprise. The Ministry noticed her knack for making people forget things and thought, yes, let's weaponize that. A few Gryffindors snickered. Penelope Clearwater had her quill at hand, already scribbling notes. Percy Weasley sat upright, watching Cassian with full attention, as if waiting for him to make a mistake he could correct. Cassian tilted his head, eyes sweeping across the room. Now, in any neat and sanitized Ministry-approved text, you'll find this charming little story, but the facts will be a little different. The Ministry loves to present their history like a polished teapot. Everything gleaming, not a smudge of scandal. He pushed off the desk and started pacing slowly, wand tapping against his palm. But as ever, question what you read in Ministry printed books. Do we really think Radford woke up one day and decided, like some low-tier Dark Lord, To scrub memories from people's heads? Or is it more likely someone somewhere thought, this will be handy for hiding my catastrophic mistakes? Felicia Spinnet raised her hand hesitantly. Professor, are you saying the ministry lies in the textbooks? Cassian spun on his heel, grinning faintly. Miss Spinnet, I am saying the ministry edits history with all the subtlety of a bludger in a teacup shop. They are curating, like a picky librarian who tosses out every book that makes their favorite author look bad. The records of memory modification charms appear in plenty of ancient writings, Sumerian tablets, for example, long before Radford strutted onto the scene in her ministry robes. The incantations weren't in Latin, of course. Not every magical community used Latin. I've already lectured you lot on why wizards here cling to it like a safety blanket. So, we'll skip that bit before you all groan. He flicked his wand lazily and chalk-scrawled Sumerian Kudu bind the mind on the board. In those tablets, there is mention of rituals to soften memories as clay before the kiln. Charming imagery, isn't it? Makes Radford look less like a pioneer and more like someone reinventing the wheel because no one told her wheels existed. Cassian let the chalk hover, giving the point a moment to land. Percy looked personally offended. How would that even work? Cassian chuckled under his breath. I am glad you asked. He strolled to his desk and started rummaging through his enchanted bag. Quills went flying. A cracked stone tablet nearly clipped his shin. He muttered something about organization being a myth as he leaned in further. Soon, half his body was swallowed by the small leather bag, legs sticking out comically. There was a muffled, triumphant, "Aha!" Cassian emerged, hair sticking up slightly, holding a strange, slender object between his fingers. He held it aloft, like a victorious archaeologist. Does anyone know what this is? The class shook their heads in unison. Cassian nodded as if they'd just validated his entire teaching career. Excellent. That means this lesson isn't a complete waste. He turned the tool in his hands, letting the light catch on its long, slightly curved end. This, my fine young inmates, is an Egyptian coal applicator. About 3,000 years old, give or take, used by men and women alike to line their eyes with coal. Not just for beauty either. Coal had protective properties, kept sand out, reduced glare in the sun, and some even believed it warded off evil spirits. A few students leaned forward, curious now. Cassian twirled the applicator like a conductor's baton. Now, what if I shaved a few millennia off its age, gave it a shinier handle, changed the name to Rosier's All-Purpose Eye Wand, and marketed it as mine? You lot would think I'd invented the thing last week. Perhaps I could even slap on an unnecessary charm. Say like it is ghost-free, on it and sell it for 10 galleons apiece to some gullible ministry wives. He grinned faintly. Point is, Radford didn't invent memory charms. She refined them, codified them, gave them ministry approval. There is a difference. History is full of these little thefts dressed up as discovery. Someone finds an ancient trick, polishes it, and suddenly they're hailed as a genius while the original gets buried under centuries of bureaucracy. Penelope Clearwater raised her hand. So what you are saying is, nothing is new. Not nothing, Cassian said, placing the coal applicator gently on his desk as if it might bite him. It might not, but Bathsheba could if he damaged it. Most ideas have ancestors. Magic, especially. Every clever bit of wand work you know was probably done first by someone barefoot in a mud hut, with a stick, hoping the gods didn't smite them mid-chant. A ripple of laughter spread through the room. Cassian leaned back on the edge of his desk, arms folded. This is why history matters. It is not just dusty names and boring dates. It teaches you to question. When someone says, I invented this, you ask, did you? Or did you nick it off some long-dead wizard, wrap it in gold, and convince the rest of us it was shiny and new? Before anyone else could raise a hand and ruin the flow, Cassian lifted his own. And just to be clear, Radford didn't try to pass memory charms off as her invention. In the first edition of her book, Magical Mindwork, a Theoretical Approach, the charm appeared under the translated section. But the ministry, He flicked his fingers like he was swatting away an irritating fly. They are good at turning footnotes into fireworks. They painted her up as a pioneer, a beacon of British magical innovation. Good par, shame about the accuracy. Percy Weasley sat bolt upright as others snickered, his face stuck halfway between suspicion and moral outrage, quill hovering midair, like it couldn't decide whether to keep taking notes or stab Cassian for treason. Chapter 79. Percy's frown deepened. That is hardly surprising. Yes, thank you for making my point. Cassian shoved off the desk and started pacing between the rows of desks. Here is the thing. People love neat little narratives. Brilliant witch invents memory charm, saves the day. Everyone claps. No one likes the messy truth that most spells are just borrowed tricks dressed in new robes. Penelope Clearwater raised her hand. Sir, if she didn't invent it, how did she even get credit in the first place? Timing, Cassian replied, not missing a beat. Radford lived in an age where Britain was trying to re-establish itself as a magical authority after centuries of quietly mooching off everyone else's hard work. She took an old practice found in Sumer, Egypt, even early Scandinavian settlements, and gave it rules. Clean, tidy ministry approved. Suddenly, instead of some dangerous old ritual your granny muttered over the soup pot, it was a spell an obliviator could use in broad daylight without accidentally frying a bystander's mind. Percy Weasley's hand shot up. Professor, are you suggesting Radford wasn't brilliant in her own right? Oh, she was brilliant. So, brilliant, in fact, she turned an obscure, messy ritual into a clean little charm you lot still use every day. Not many spells stick around this long without getting butchered or improved by someone with more ego than sense. He tilted his head, pacing a few slow steps in front of the board. And as I said, no, Radford wasn't some glory-hungry maniac. She didn't care if people sang her name. She wanted people to learn, use, refine. That is it. Alas, Cassian said with a faint smirk, like all good innovators, she wasn't half as clever in politics. That, my dear fifth years, is where the ministry came in and decided to paint her as some shining poster witch of British magical prowess. Because why let facts get in the way of a good nationalistic bedtime story? Penelope raised her hand again. So, sir, would you say Radford's version is better, or the older one's? Depends what you mean by better. Safer? Absolutely. More efficient? Probably. But the Sumerian variant, for example, had interesting side effects. Oliver Wood frowned. What sort of side effects? Cassian shrugged like he was discussing the weather. They would completely destroy the being. You can call it a soul remover if you like. He flicked the wand to underline kudu again. See, unlike your friendly ministry obliviators, whose job is wiping poor muggles' brains after someone's blown up a chimney. The Sumerians used this charm on the most notorious criminals. This wasn't your casual, oops, I saw magic memory wipe. This was designed to scrub a person clean and recycle the sinner back into society. Whether there was much of them left afterwards is debatable. Class froze collectively, staring with the jaw slacking. A Ravenclaw boy at the back leaned forward slightly, quill hovering. That sounds more like punishment than rehabilitation, a Gryffindor girl said. He looked at her, lips quirking like he'd just spotted a trap laid out in the open. Is it? What is the purpose of prisons, Miss Locksley? Phoebe's quill hesitated mid-scratch. To punish wrongdoers. Punish, Cassian repeated, rolling the word like it was sour in his mouth. Interesting answer. One I would wager 90% of the world would parrot without thinking, and yet prisons claim to be about rehabilitation, reforming the criminal, rebuilding them into something society can tolerate again. He spread his hands. Do we really buy that? Or is it just easier to tell ourselves we are noble, rather than admit we enjoy locking people up and forgetting they exist? Alden Cresswell let out a whistle from the back, slouching deeper in his seat. Heavy for a Friday morning, sir. Cassian shot him a sidelong glance, the corner of his mouth curling. Oh, we haven't hit heavy yet, Cresswell. That comes when we cover how the Egyptians used memory stripping to create slaves who couldn't even remember their own names. He turned back to class, one brow raised. Prisons weren't built for punishment or to heal society's collective conscience. Originally, they were nothing but holding pens. You stuck criminals in there, waited for a war to kick off, then shoved them to the front lines in exchange for their freedom. He paused, letting that hang for a moment while the room shuffled uncomfortably. Why? Because the most valuable commodity on Earth has always been people. Not gold, not jewels. People, especially the sort already willing to kill to claw back their freedom. Cassian's voice cut before anyone could make a joke of it. So no, he went on. Prisons weren't created to punish or rehabilitate. That is a modern gloss we slap on so we can all sleep better at night. If anything, the Sumerians were closer to humane. They knew a person's cruelty wasn't born in the bones, it was taught. And what's taught can be erased. Their logic was brutal yet pragmatic. Erase the learned violence. Start again. Wouldn't that? A Gryffindor girl in the second row faltered, her quill halfway to the parchment. Wouldn't that just erase who they were? Exactly, Cassian said. And isn't that the whole point? The girl shrank a little. You are all thinking it is barbaric, but consider this. If someone's life has been steeped in violence, cruelty, all the worst lessons the world could teach them, is it more barbaric to lock them in a stone box until they rot? Or to give them a chance to start again? Percy Weasley made a noise in the back of his throat, somewhere between a cough and a huff. It isn't justice. Cassian's head tilted, swallowing the derisive laughter. Define justice, Weasley. Is it vengeance? Is it rebalancing the scales? Or is it making sure no one else gets hurt? Percy's lips thinned, but he didn't answer. Thought so, Cassian said, eyes flicking lazily from one student to the other. Now, if you think this sort of thing is ancient history, archaic and irrelevant, think again. Obliviate still uses the same core principle. We just prefer to use it on unsuspecting muggles instead of murderers. Penelope raised her hand, cautious but curious. Would that even work today? The Sumerian method? Cassian snorted softly. Work? Sure. The principles are sound. Memory, identity, behavior. It's all threads in the same weave. Tug too many, the whole thing unravels. But do I trust any modern witch or wizard not to botch it and turn someone's brain into porridge? He shook his head slowly. See, the Sumerians weren't messing about with dainty little wands and ministry-approved protocols. They carved their runes into stone, chanted until their throats gave out, and poured raw will into the spell. If they failed, the subject died screaming or wandered off as a husk. Simple, brutal, effective. That sounds risky, Oliver Wood muttered. He chuckled, tossing the chalk lightly from one hand to the other. There was a blunder recently. Some bright-eyed intern managed to fry a muggle's brain. Young bloke. So they did what the ministry always does. Obliviate the parents, the neighbors, the schoolmates, the milkman, probably the dog too. Everyone who'd known him wiped clean, except they missed one. His mate, old friend who moved out of town years before. When he visited, he found no one remembered the bloke. Not his mum, not his dad, not the kids they'd grown up with. Nothing. Like he dreamt him up. A gasp went through the classroom. The mate went home, convinced he was losing it. Properly insane. He dug out an old shoebox full of photos, just to prove to himself the guy existed. Found one, grainy, sun-bleached thing of them both grinning like idiots at a school fair. Relief, right? Except he was still confused, so he posted the picture in the paper. Headline, "Anyone else remember this person? Or just me?" Cassian gave a wry smile. Ministry nearly wet themselves over that one. Had to work overtime to clean it up. Special task force, memory audits, even on Muggle side. A Gryffindor let out a low whistle. That is mental. Exactly, Cassian said, tapping the table. This is the cost of meddling with memory. You start off thinking you are doing a harmless cleanup and end up deleting someone from the collective consciousness. One slip, and it all unravels. People aren't just their own memories. They are stitched into everyone else's too. It is not something that should be used casually. A Ravenclaw boy frowned, glancing up from his notes. Couldn't they just restore the bloke's memories later? If they fixed the mistake? You would think, Cassian said, turning slightly so the whole class could see him. But memory charms aren't just reversible like a simple levitation spell. They carve grooves into the mind. Even if you undo the magic, what is left might not fit back together. Imagine smashing a vase, then trying to glue it back with half the shards missing and the rest warped from the impact. At best, you get a lopsided vase that leaks. At worst, nothing recognizable at all. Oliver tapped his quill nervously on his parchment. So, what happened to the muggle? Cassian shrugged. He lives in a care home now. Sweet lad, apparently. Smiles a lot. Doesn't know who he is. He walked to his desk, allowing them to sit with it. Now, Cassian went on, picture this. Someone mugs you, takes your wand. Maybe hexes you in the process. Under British law, they get 10 years in Azkaban if the Wizengamot is feeling generous. They rot there, Dementors sucking them hollow until they come out worse than they went in. That is justice, right? No one answered. Or, Cassian continued, you strip the memories, wipe away every trace of the crime. No mugging, no hex, no sense they were ever the sort of person who could do it. You set them up in a little cottage with a nice job in the Flu Network Authority and let them think they've always been a model citizen. He stopped pacing and stared at them. Which one is the punishment? And which one actually stops them from doing it again? But, sir, wouldn't that be like killing them? If you erase all their memories, aren't they gone? Cassian tilted his head. That is the question, isn't it? Is a person still themselves without their memories? Or are we just the sum of every lesson, mistake, and heartbreak we've ever had? He shrugged. The Sumerians didn't care. They believed the soul was separate from memory. Wipe the mind, and the soul was free to try again. He basked in their uneasy faces, like a cat watching trapped mice. Then he waved his hand lazily. You are dismissed. 3 feet on alternative uses of memory charms in ancient civilizations. Cite properly. Don't give me bedtime stories. And as always, you are free to skip. A flick of his wand, and the chalk scrawled due Friday across the board with a little underline for emphasis. Half the Gryffindors slumped in relief, already gathering their parchment. The Ravenclaws, predictably, looked insulted at the very idea anyone would skip homework. Meriton, he called as the boy sauntered past. Your essay better have fewer ink blots than last time, or I am feeding it to the fire, understood? Yes, sir, Leo drawled without looking back. Don't yes, sir, me. Prove you've seen a library. The door clicked shut, leaving the room blissfully quiet. Cassian dropped into the chair behind his desk with a long sigh and let his head fall back. 3 feet. Why do I do this to myself? He muttered, staring at the ceiling. A sharp knock at the door pulled his attention back down. Bathsheba leaned in, parchment in one hand. You've traumatized another set of 5th years, haven't you? She said mildly, stepping inside. They are fine. A little fear builds character. Cassian shoved a stack of essays to one side, making room for her parchment. What is that? Runes from the Hanling Mausoleum. I copied the inscriptions before leaving China. Cassian perked up, straightening in his chair. Finally, something interesting. Chapter 80. Until April, classes carried on as they were. Cassian saw the same faces dragging in and out of his classroom, some bright-eyed, some already hollowed out by Owl and Newt Prep. Then Hermione showed up again. She hadn't let go of her argument about books being infallible. Oh no. If anything, she doubled, tripled down. Only this time, her reason wasn't quite the same. She lingered behind after class with Harry, both of them standing awkwardly by the desk as the last stragglers filed out. They looked at him like a pair of overgrown puppies, big-eyed, fidgety, trying to seem casual and failing miserably. Cassian dropped his pen onto the parchment he was about to mark and raised an eyebrow. Let me guess, you are not here because you love the smell of ink and chalk. Hermione straightened, her hands clasped tightly around her bag strap. Professor, We were wondering if you knew anything about Nicholas Flamel. Harry stayed quiet, looking like he already regretted tagging along. Cassian leaned back in his chair, resting his elbows on the armrests. Flamel, eh? He tilted his head. Bit of an odd question for 2 first years. Why the sudden interest in an old alchemist? Hermione's eyes shone at the title, though she pushed on with some hesitation. It is important. We think it might help us with. She stopped herself, lips pressing into a thin line. Well, something dangerous. Cassian's eyes narrowed slightly, though his voice stayed light. You realize that doesn't narrow it down. Hogwarts practically runs on dangerous somethings. Harry's shoulders twitched like he wanted to step in but thought better of it. Hermione's fist clenched, then she sighed. We just need to know if you've read about him. Anything at all. Cassian tapped a finger against the desk, studying the pair. Nicholas Flamel, born 1326, allegedly still alive. Famous for his work on alchemy, particularly the Philosopher's Stone. Hermione's shoulders jumped slightly at that last bit. Cassian didn't miss it. Ah, he said, lips curling faintly. So that is the angle. Harry shifted his weight from foot to foot. Cassian squinted at them, hands clasped under his chin. You wouldn't come to me without scouring the library first, which means you failed to find anything, and that is impossible. Nicholas Flamel isn't exactly an obscure name. He is mentioned at least once in half the books worth opening. He paused, the answer slotting into place, which means his grin spread slow and sharp. What is it? Harry asked, then he pressed his lips together, like the words had slipped out before he could catch them. Cassian gave a soft laugh. Nothing. This is just getting interesting. Hermione's brow pinched. What is? Cassian pressed a finger to his lips. No Alohomora works here. Sealed tighter than a Gringotts vault with a dragon on night shift. He smirked like a child, keeping the world's best secret. Well, all I will say is he is a friend and a teacher to the headmaster. Hermione's breath hitched. Cassian wagged a finger at her. Don't think too hard, Miss Granger. You'll sprain something. Oh, and there is a muggle version and a magical version of him? There is a muggle version. Hermione blurted with disbelief. Both Harry and Hermione looked taken aback. Cassian smirked, steepling his fingers. Of course there is. History isn't as neat as your library indexes would have you believe. For every wizard who made waves, there is a muggle historian trying to stitch together scraps and call it truth. Flamel is practically a celebrity in some circles, though if you asked half the historians I knew back home, they would call him a fraud or a myth. He pops up in muggle manuscripts, alchemy treatises, even trashy novels. Hermione frowned. But Flamel was real, wasn't he? The magical one? Oh, very real, Cassian said lightly. Though I suppose the muggle world only ever saw hints? Half of them still argue whether he existed at all. Poor Sir Isaac Newton spent years sniffing around alchemical texts, thinking he could bottle the secret of eternal life. Little did he know, Flamel was already several centuries ahead and probably laughing himself sick. Harry blinked. Newton, the apple bloke? Cassian went visibly aghast, as if the entire Enlightenment had just been rebranded Apple Guy. He shook his head and said, The very one. Wrote more about turning lead into gold than he ever did about apples. Though you won't find that in your Muggle science books. Makes you wonder what else they've polished up for polite company. Hermione's brows furrowed so tightly they might have fused. That is absurd. If Newton really worked on alchemy, real alchemy, why isn't it common knowledge? Because your lot like tidy narratives, Cassian replied with a shrug. You want heroes and geniuses, not men who spent sleepless nights praying over melted tin and magic. Muggles can't stomach it. Easier to call it superstition and carry on. Hermione looked like she wanted to argue, but couldn't quite find her footing. Cassian's gaze sharpened, though his tone stayed breezy. I take it, you are not asking because you are curious about Enlightenment philosophers. So, tell me, why does Flamel matter to you two? Harry glanced nervously at Hermione, who bit her lip and said nothing. Thought so, Cassian murmured. He pushed his chair back and stood, smoothing the front of his robes. Look, whatever you are tangled up in, I am not about to play the omniscient mentor. You won't get some grand speech out of me. Harry shifted his weight again. "We just wanted to understand. That is all." Cassian chuckled coldly. Understanding's dangerous. Gets you asking questions. And next thing you know, you are in over your head." Hermione's fingers dug into her bag strap. "So you do know something." "I know plenty," Cassian said easily, stepping around the desk. "But I also know when to keep my mouth shut. The headmaster's business isn't mine to spill." Hermione's face fell slightly, though Harry looked almost relieved. Cassian paused by the door, hand resting on the frame. "A bit of advice. If you are sniffing after the Philosopher's Stone, be careful. Stones like that don't tend to lie about gathering dust. They draw the wrong sort of people." Hermione's mouth opened, but before she could get a word out, he added, "And no, I am not telling you more. Go revise your charms. God knows Flitwick's got less patience than me." Harry and Hermione exchanged a look. Cassian caught it and snorted. "Go on then," he waved them out. "Before I decide you need 3 feet on 18th century Muggle alchemy, with diagrams. And color, if you're feeling bold." That sent them scurrying. The door clicked shut behind them. Cassian rubbed his temples and muttered, "Flamel, Philosopher's Stones, and first years poking their noses where they shouldn't. Dumbledore, you mad old goat? What have you dropped in my lap this time?" He went to the back room and started digging through the pile of daily profits stacked in a precarious tower by the window. Luckily, they were still in order. He hadn't let them slip into complete chaos yet. When he reached September 1st, he stopped. There it was. Break-in at Gringotts. His eyes flicked down the page. A thief had managed to breach the goblins' security. But the vault was emptied earlier that day. Not everyone could stroll into Gringotts and walk out alive. If breaking in were easy, families wouldn't pour generations of wealth into those vaults. Whatever had been there, it wasn't pocket change. So whatever had been in that vault wasn't just valuable, it was bloody important. Then there was Dumbledore's little request. Cryptic as ever, Cassian and a handful of others had been asked to prepare traps for the third-floor corridor. Not strong enough to maim, just enough for a first year to struggle through and maybe sweat a little. Of course, the old man hadn't said it outright, but the meaning was clear enough. At the time, Cassian thought it was odd. Hogwarts was full of weird little projects. Sure, but designing soft obstacles for children wasn't standard practice. And now Harry Potter, the boy who lived, was sniffing around the Philosopher's Stone. Cassian tossed the paper onto the desk, watching it skid to a stop. "Curious," he muttered. "How very bloody curious." His fingers drummed against the wood, eyes narrowing as he stared at the headline. He didn't know how to feel about it. If it really was the Philosopher's Stone, did he want it? Oh, absolutely. Who was he trying to kid? That thing wasn't just a lump of magic. It was living history. Cassian dragged a hand down his face and let out a low groan. Bloody hell, this is going to get messy. The stone wasn't just about turning lead into gold or brewing up immortality. It was a relic from a man who'd outsmarted death for centuries. Flamel wasn't some fairy tale wizard tucked into the margins of old books. He was real, and Cassian would bet every galleon he had that the man hadn't survived this long by being careless. The question clawed at his thoughts. If it was here, at Hogwarts, why? Why leave something like that lying around in a school full of hormonal teenagers and stairs that couldn't make up their minds about where they wanted to be? There was temptation there, the kind that dug in under your skin and whispered, "Go on, have a look." He could almost picture himself flipping through Flamel's notes, hands ink-stained and mind-whirring, unraveling centuries of alchemical secrets. Dangerous thing, curiosity, he said under his breath, shaking the thought off. Cassian shoved the parchment aside and pulled another from the pile. Maybe the best thing he could do right now was stay out of it. Whatever Dumbledore was up to, Cassian wasn't keen on becoming collateral damage. The headmaster had a way of tossing people into chaos with that twinkle in his eye, like it was all part of some grand plan. Still, the itch in his chest wouldn't leave. The historian in him screamed to study it, to document every inch of that stone. God, if he could even lay eyes on it. Then something sparked in his mind.